Perfect. And we'll call the Standing Committee meeting of January 19th, 2021 to order at 4:01 p.m. We'll begin with the adoption of the agenda, and I'll start with administration. Administration, do we have any changes or any additions to the agenda?
No changes, thank you.
Council, any changes, additions, discussion? If not, we are looking for direction to approve. Councillor Nelson.
So I just had a question. I thought that the discussion item was going to be addressed during agenda before we adopted the agenda.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, yep.
I can speak to that. There was an addition, so that we have a revised version that includes the report, which was accepted for information as part of the agenda. And the discussion item will be led by CAO Olson. So since the first draft went out with Councillor Nelson's name there, it'll be CAO Olson that will introduce the topic and then hand it over to council.
Councillor Nelson, does that address your concern?
Yeah, sure does. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, any additions, any changes, or we are looking to accept? Councillor Reyes.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I move to adopt the Standing Committee agenda, January 19th, 2021.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor Reyes. Council, is there any discussion on that item? Very well. Seeing none, I will call that to question. All those in favor, please indicate. And seeing none opposed, that is carried unanimously. Thank you, Council. Thank you, Administration. We will move on to Citizens Minute with Council. I've been advised by Administration that although we did have one citizen who was going to be speaking today, they've since been unable to speak. And Wendy, I don't believe there is anybody else in queue.
No, there is not.
Perfect. So we will move then to delegations and presentations. This afternoon, we do have one delegation on non-approved accommodations. It will be presented by Tracy Douglas Blowers, Director, Membership and Industry Relations, Alberta Hotel and Lodging Association, Kelly Armstrong, Justin Woodley, and Natalie Charlton. So folks, thanks so much for taking time to come out and present to council this evening. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. My name is Tracy Douglas Blowers. I'm the Director of Membership and Industry Relations for the Alberta Hotel and Lodging Association, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today on the topic of short-term rentals. Home sharing appeals to a segment of travelers and homeowners who want to augment their income, and platforms that enable these short-term rentals like Airbnb maintain that the revenue they generate helps people to make ends meet. But the reality is that these platforms are multinational corporations that have created a new kind of real estate investor, one who operates short-term rentals as a commercial enterprise. This can create conflicts in condominiums and residential neighborhoods by allowing them to operate without regard for zoning and your existing land use bylaw. It can negatively impact neighbors' peaceful enjoyment of their own properties as a result of increased noise, garbage, demand for parking, and partying. It can negatively affect their neighbors' property values, and it can jeopardize public safety by increasing the risk of criminal activities such as human trafficking, sexual exploitation, and the drug trade in condominiums and neighborhoods where they operate. We believe that the town of Hinton has an opportunity to create a regulatory framework for short-term rentals that will ensure that people who live and work in Hinton are able to peacefully and safely enjoy their homes and neighborhoods, and to create a level playing field for everyone in the accommodation business. Anyone operating 2 or more entire home units on a year-round basis is running a short-term rental business that pays residential, not commercial property tax, is not registered with the town and doesn't have a business license, alters the housing and accommodation market in your community, reducing the availability of affordable long-term housing. It has no obligation to assure the health and safety of their guests and neighbors by complying with the fire code, the health code, or the Innkeepers Act. This includes things like adequate pest control, which is an important issue in condominium buildings, fire prevention and suppression systems, and disinfection and sanitation protocols, which are critical in light of the current COVID-19 pandemic. And it can result in lost tax revenue for all orders of government. Savvy operators are turning home sharing into a new class of investment, converting residential units into ghost hotels, avoiding the normal costs of doing business and creating additional demands on municipal resources like police, waste removal, and bylaw enforcement. Residents of Hinton are in fact subsidizing these business owners who pay residential property taxes on their commercial enterprises. Hinton hotels are not seeking to regulate homeowners who occasionally rent a room in their own home, but we do believe that those who operate an accommodation business should be subject to the same taxes and regulations. As a community on the edge of a world-class tourist destination, Hinton's legislation needs to keep pace with the new realities of the accommodation sector. The business owners who have invested in Hinton and who employ your friends and neighbors ask that you consider the signal that taking a wait-and-see approach sends to businesses that have purchased land, secured development permits and business licenses, hired builders, tradespeople and staff, and that pay commercial property taxes. We ask you to consider the impact that unregulated short-term rentals will have on your community and its residents, the unfair advantage that short-term rentals have over Hinton's 23 hotels, which are required to comply with legislation and regulations that assure the health, safety, and security of their guests, and that employ hundreds of residents and are heavily invested in your local economy. We also ask you to consider that, like ride-sharing services, short-term rentals need appropriate regulation and safeguards. And also that from a governance perspective, to think about whether policies who themselves operate short-term rentals may have a conflict of interest on this issue. The government of Alberta has passed legislation requiring operators of short-term rentals to collect and remit the tourism levy, and requiring that short-term rental platforms are responsible for sharing information related to host listings and rental activity. Now is the time for Hinton to explore a regulatory framework that protects residents and creates a level playing field for all accommodation providers. For this reason, we encourage the town of Hinton to restrict short-term rentals to principal residences only for a maximum of 30 nights per year, to require all providers of short-term accommodation to hold a current business license so that you can build an inventory, and that they have an occupancy permit and carry adequate property and liability insurance. We encourage the town of Hinton to require all providers of short-term accommodation to comply with municipal bylaws and zoning, including your land use bylaw, and to require short-term rental platforms like Airbnb and HomeAway to be licensed with the town. Appreciate you taking the time to put us on your agenda today, and thank you for your interest in this issue.
Tracy, thank you so much. Again, we certainly enjoy the fact that we're able to hear from your organization and other members of our business community who have a vested interest in ensuring that we have safe and sustainable accommodations in the town that follow legislation. So I'm going to turn it over to council to see if we do have any discussions, and we'll begin with Councillor Hawes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Tracy, and to the others that's joined us today. I do really appreciate, obviously, we've had this discussion as council and at a previous time, and again, the report has come back to us in our discussion item, so I'm looking forward to that dialogue. I just have a couple of, I guess, one question in particular. You said that the provincial government has changed, that they require the tourism levy. How are they collecting this? What through what means have they put in place so that that levy is being collected? Any idea?
They implemented that legislation shortly before the pandemic hit, and they require the levy to be collected by the platform. So by Airbnb, HomeAway, rather than having individual operators remit it. But I believe that there is a requirement for the platforms to be able to provide a listing of operators to the government.
Okay, and if I may, Mr. Chair, follow up. I'm just curious on have they complied? Are they where, like, how is that working thus far with that particular levy?
That I don't know. As with many other things, COVID threw a wrench into that because I think the implementation was to occur over the summer, if I'm not mistaken, and the government has actually abated the tourism levy to March 31st, 2021 at this point. So they're not collecting it from any operators, hotels, short-term rentals, anybody who would be covered by the Tourism Levy Act.
Okay, and if, Mr. Chair, if there's others in queue, I'll go back in the queue.
I do have myself in queue and then Councillor Race. So if that's okay, I'll throw
Yeah.
you back after that.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracy.
You betcha. Thanks, Councillor Haas. Tracy, I do have a question. I mean, for the most part, in looking through the presentation that was provided to council with the recommendations that you had gone over, 99% of the concerns and recommendations that you presented, I certainly find myself in agreement with, or at least wanting to discuss with council. There was one particular item that I had a question about, and that was the background on the 30-day recommended limit. Because when I consider other small businesses, from people in our town working out of their homes, we don't limit the number of days that they can do business with a proper business license following regulations. What's the background on the 30-day limit recommendation?
I think our position with regard to the 30 days is that if you are doing this in your principal residence, putting a limit on the number of nights that you're doing it keeps it at a home-based business level, as opposed to a full-blown commercial enterprise that is renting accommodation 365 nights a year.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. I have Councillor Race and then Councillor Haas.
Mr. Chair, I'm good. My question has been answered.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor Haas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious too, to go back to, you said it was the platform that is basically in charge of collecting the tourism levy once it gets going again. There's nothing stopping these, private businesses though not to use that platform. Is that correct? If they were to decide to say go on Facebook or something like that, and but there's nothing stopping them. So I mean, there's ways around, particularly even just the tax or the tourism levy, or am I mistaken?
I suppose if they were to advertise on a platform like, let's say, Kijiji or Facebook, where the platform, that's maybe not their core business, that would be a way around it, but then they would be accountable for otherwise remitting the Tourism Levy Act. And if they didn't, and they were reported, I suppose there could be an enforcement action by the provincial government. The law is the law. The law is that the levy has to be collected and remitted. So whether they do that through the platform or they do it individually.
Okay. The reason I ask is because, I mean, a lot of these are, again, they are not, for lack of a better word, necessarily a legit business. They don't hold a business license or anything like that. And I guess that's where my concern, we put these, I think with what's in place right now, doesn't necessarily enforce or ensure that, these things are being followed. Because I'm of the same mind for Councillor Bagoon that I believe there's a lot of checks and balances that people need to be accountable for in our community. And I mean, taxes for one, but the other is COVID related as well. I mean, currently, the way I look at it, and we can have this conversation later, but everyone that has a Airbnb currently is in violation of restrictions because it is not a family member. It's not, so they currently are in violation of those restrictions. Whereas if they were a legit business, they would have all the parameters necessary, such as hotel owners in regards to cleanliness due to COVID and all of those things. So, I mean, in fact, it even benefits them So, but I just wasn't sure how solid this platform, and this, I guess, way to somewhat control and get some finances from them. So thank you again, Tracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tracy, I see Justin there, everyone else who are here today for that. Thanks for joining us. My question pertains to what Councillor Magoon spoke about regarding the 30 nights. And I'm asking this in the sense of, well, it's been asked to me, and I want to flesh out all the possibilities, even though myself, I have maybe no true opinion on it. What if there was a model? So in your own dwelling, a lot of people will rent out a floor, a basement, the third floor of their house. That's their quote unquote Airbnb space. Some people argue, well, that would be weird to just do a second dwelling, a secondary suite for just 30 nights. What are your thoughts or any comments on the approach of limiting the amount of business licenses within a community based on their population and their residences, but allowing them to do it the whole year? Any input or comments regarding that possibility?
I think council would want to think about what its goals are. If it's to ensure that neighbors who are in a residential area have the right to expect that everybody on the block is using their property to a similar level of intensity, that is probably something to give consideration to. I think council would have to look at what is important to your community. You can look at all different models. Every city in the world is looking at this differently, and some have had very successful approaches, and some have had to make a number of different attempts to get the right legislation in place for their community.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And we are back to Councillor Hawes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like the idea of 30 nights and I preface it because there are the people that have Airbnbs that do rent out a room, subsidize some of their income, maybe their mortgage or whatever throughout the year. But I know myself am aware at least 3 homes that are owned by outside of Hinton, the citizens who rent out their entire home year round in Airbnb. So, I mean, realistically, they're creating it like a hotel, basically, and it doesn't restrict them. And I can see that, having a specific amount of, say, 30 nights or whatever it may be, but would then potentially eliminate some of those, because I'm also well aware that it's taking some homes out of the market. And some people are looking for homes and are unable to either get affordable homes, which most of these that I'm aware of are more affordable homes, and it's taken it off the market. So I can definitely see the justification for that if you're going to be doing it as a side business versus a full year-round business. So I appreciate that and look forward to further conversation as council. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ostashik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll likely ask this question later on this evening as well when it comes up as a discussion item, but since we have the experts who seem fairly informed on short-term rentals, I'd like to ask a question regarding data for usage of short-term rental facilities. It's pretty easy to go online and find out what's listed for rent to gauge numbers, but that's obviously not the full picture because it doesn't encompass what has been rented. In your knowledge, is there anywhere where a person can go to see what the total number of short-term rentals that are advertised and being used is available?
The company that I'm aware of that does that kind of research and data gathering is called AirDNA. And they have a method of scraping listings to get an accurate picture of how much rental activity there is, because as you say, You can see what's available tonight, but you don't know to what extent that represents the entire amount of inventory that's available, either because perhaps that unit is rented that night, or perhaps that person took their home off the market for that night, day, week, month, or whatever period. But AirDNA is the organization that I'm familiar with. There may be others.
Great, thank you very much. I appreciate the link to that resource, and I'll definitely be checking it out as we continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ostashik. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining tonight. My question, do you guys know of any municipality, particularly one that's smaller, not maybe City of Edmonton or City of Vancouver, that's had success in implementing some regulations around short-term rentals?
When I was preparing for this meeting, of the cities in Alberta that would be sort of a comparable, a relevant comparison, Canmore was the most obvious. At this point, Calgary, Edmonton, and Canmore are the only cities that have any kind of regulations around short-term rentals in Alberta that I'm aware of. Canmore has actually had their regulations in place long before Airbnb. They have, let me just look at my notes here. So in Canmore, they limit short-term rentals to tourist homes only, and those are permitted. Those are a permitted or discretionary use in commercial and mixed-use districts only. So they're not in residential neighborhoods.
Well, yeah, I appreciate that. I look forward to sharing a few more things around that when we have the discussion item. So thank you.
Just if I may, Mr. Chair, I know that Canmore has undertaken enforcement activities for people who have rented their homes on the online platforms and who are not zoned for that. I think probably Canmore, again, because this bylaw has been in place for some time now, they've been well prepared to enforce on it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Councillor Nelson, did that get into what you needed it to?
Yeah, I'm all set. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Council, I do not have anybody else on our speakers list, unless, of course, I miss someone. So we'll just give one final chance. Are there any further follow-ups, questions, or comments prior to moving on to our action items? All right. Well, then, seeing none, this is an action, or pardon me, this is a discussion item later on in this evening's agenda after our action items. So I would please, just on behalf of council, the mayor and the town, thank you so much for taking your time to come out this evening. I know this is certainly an area that is a concern for a number of us, and I look forward to discussing it with the remainder of council later on tonight. So thanks for your time. And, if you have any follow-up or concerns, please feel free to get in touch with council and share those.
Thanks for having us. We appreciate you having us here, and thanks for answering the questions, Trace. Appreciate
Thank you very much for the invitation and for your attention. And again, happy to answer any questions you may have. We'll send a follow-up with a few other points to your questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Council, we are going to move on to our action items. We will proceed to the first action item, the temporary mandatory mask and face coverings bylaw review. We'll start with our CAO, Ms. Olson. Is there any information that needs to be provided on this action item currently?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not at this time. Not much to report. We've seen a couple of complaints of non-compliance come through at some of our local businesses, but overall things are good. No new enforcement activities that needed to be undertaken in those situations.
Chief Martins, did you have anything you want to add on behalf of administration at this time? Perfect. Thank you. Council, any questions or points of discussion on action item number 1? Okay, very well. Seeing none, then we will move on to our second action item, the Beaver Boardwalk Committee report on page 5 of our report, and that will be presented by the Beaver Boardwalk Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If it's all right, I can do a short intro and then open it up to the other members of the committee to highlight anything that they would like or engage in discussion with council that way. So just as a bit of a highlight reel of the report here, the BEVO committee has been meeting since July 2019 to review information regarding the boardwalk condition, to create some engagement opportunities for public and stakeholder engagement, and produce some recommendations based on the future of the boardwalk. Some of the work the committee was responsible for was impacted by the AEP Water Act approval, with full approval received just over a week ago, and some partial approvals prior to the end of 2020. In the fall of 2020, MSP funds were applied for to support substantial maintenance and rehabilitation of the boardwalk in 2021, and a report was committed to by the committee to bring forward recommendations as well as to include from administration a high-level work plan overview to promote the understanding of the intended use of the funding that we've received, and to bring to council for review and ultimately approval so that that work can proceed as soon as possible. Under the analysis section of the report, the deliverables for the BEVO committee are itemized, including 14 proposed recommendations that the group's worked on. The recommended action for this item tonight is that the recommendations be brought to February 2nd, 2021 regular council meeting for decision. Please note that the report says 2020, I think, for all the dates. I thought maybe we were ready to move on from 2020, so apologies if that created any confusion. Happy to leave 2020 in the rearview mirror. At this point, I'll turn things over to the committee. If any of the committee members have things to highlight or to speak to, I invite that support now.
Thank you, CAO Olson. So, committee, are there any members that want to open things up for us? Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think really this is the time to, anytime you have a subcommittee, we kind of narrow the target, and it's really getting any input from council to see, are we way off on certain things, have that open discussion in public to say, okay, how close are we? So I think Ms. Olson summarized this pretty good. So really, I think feedback from the rest of council would be ideal. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have Councillor Haas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, I just want to, commend everybody on the work that has been done. I know that it's gone longer than we expected, but after seeing the report and the recommendations, I have to say it's very thorough and very well thought out. I guess the only thing that I'd like to maybe ask about to administration and to the committee, I noticed, and I'm not sure how this worked in the discussions, but because I know in the past we talked about different sections and that, say Maxwell Lake wasn't the same as the Beaver Boardwalk. But I'm curious about the bridge and any recommendations. I didn't see any recommendations in regards to this of completing it. So I was wondering if someone could please share where we're at with that and maybe why it's not included as part of the recommendations. Thank you.
Ms. Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To answer that question, Councillor Haas, this was outside of the scope, the mandate of the Beaver Boardwalk Committee. The bridge is a separate project, has different members of administration involved as well. And Council has requested that prior to any work commencing and the expending of any ISIP funds on that project, that a report comes forward to Council to describe the nature of that work and what's being considered to use that funding. So this was outside of the scope of the committee. The committee really focused on the future of the Beaver Boardwalk, though we did at times, there is some overlap there, discuss a little bit about the bridge. It's not included in the recommendations, as that will be a separate report to council coming prior to the end of Q1.
Okay. And if I may, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, and I appreciate that and realize, we talked about this, prior about having a report brought, and I appreciate the clarification, because I believe there's some confusion about in the community about that particular item in that area. But just highlighting that it is being assessed and continued, and a separate report will come through that's outside of the scope of this, the terms of reference on this committee. That's great. I think that's important for our community members to understand. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Councillor Wong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I wanted to ask the committee members. Recommendation 1 talks about establishment of an oversight committee, and it talks a little bit about the composition being determined through terms of reference. I was wondering if there's any early indication of what the scope of that oversight committee would be. What would be their purview? Would they be dictating? Would they be advisory? I guess I just wanted to get a sense of where the committee was going with that.
Committee members, is there anyone that wants to address that? Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, I think there's a few ways to go with it. One of the things we talked about a lot is whatever we do with these terms of reference are probably going to be good, but not perfect. And as that committee evolves, I think that's where it'll eventually land on. But at the start, it's largely advisement. It's going over things with administration, but ultimately the approval is still more on council at this time, and the group is more in an advisory role. But that's the starting point. So if we tried to get all these recommendations perfect, we'd never be coming before this group. So the terms of reference will be a starting point. Even just the composition will be a starting point as well, because once it's up and running, there may be people that you realize that really should be around the table that maybe you didn't think of during the process. So and I look forward to some stakeholder engagement when we get going down the path of this terms of reference to try to make sure we get the right people to help formulate a lot of those terms of references early. So and if I could just on Councillor Haas's point around the bridge, the council committee, the bridge was out of the scope, but I think it would be sensible when that bridge discussion comes back to council that we may look at including the bridge as part of that group. I think it makes a lot of sense just procedurally with the different things that were happening within the town of Hinton. It made sense to keep it separate, but I think overall it makes perfect sense for the bridge to be under the scope of the permanent committee. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. I have myself and Councillor Ostashik up. And just to speak to that, yeah, I think in the long run, and we saw public feedback just this week in an email form speaking to the entire long-term vision of having the bridge rolled into the Beaver Boardwalk area as, a natural part of the community engagement that we do. And I think that's the part that I'm most excited about in looking over the report from the committee, is giving our, those members in our community who are very interested and have a vested interest in this area, giving them a venue to participate and feel like they have ownership in recommending to council, and just developing that area of our community. And I think that's what was missing in this entire process. So again, out of all of this, I think there's a real positive to be had. But I'd really like to see us implement the recommendation of getting that community committee together as quickly as possible. So that is sort of my personal feelings on that. And I will go to Councillor Ostashik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't have a question or anything as a committee member. I was hoping to respond to Councillor Waugh's question regarding the composition of the duties of the committee. So I think a lot of the duties that we talked about through the process are addressed in some of the recommendations that are in the report. The committee's referenced a lot through there, but I think as the existing Beaver Boardwalk Committee moves forward and participates in developing the terms of reference, it's going to make the role of that permanent committee a lot more clear. So I think we'll have some more clarity as we move forward. But as Councillor Nelson said, the anticipated role right now is probably an advisory role. And we look forward to having that come back to council at some point in the future as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ostashik. I have Councillor Waugh, then Councillor Haas.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Councillor Stashik and Councillor Nelson for the insight. This is a great starting point, but just in case there are people that might be curious to join the advisory group or the committee, I just wanted to kind of give them some sort of insight as to what the vision may be. So I appreciate the information that was provided. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. Councillor Haas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess to a process question, and it may be not answerable at this time until terms of reference, but is this committee going to be similar to other committees that we have, say that, people submit their application and then council votes or approves those members of it, or is it going to be different? So I'm referencing other committees, whether it be the lack of words, or but the library per se, or no, not the library, but the community grant committee, and is it going to be similar to that, or is it going to be a different process?
Committee members, anyone like to respond or speak? Oh, I saw Miss Olson first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll defer to Councillor Nelson.
Councillor Nelson?
I think tonight is a great opportunity to hear from where the rest of council stand on it. And I think when we go out to the community, we'll hear it too. Personally, and this is not on behalf of the committee, because we didn't get into the makeup that much. We do have a list of stakeholders that we have acknowledged. I'm not sure what the size is, but I think almost in an idea of SEAC in a way where you try to make sure you've got all your pillars covered off. It would be really easy to forget a group like tourism or potentially HIMBA being in there. But I think largely the makeup, I think the important part is it's people who are engaged and passionate about that area. And I think from there, you kind of narrow it down. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I have Mr. Mayor, and I'm not sure, perhaps Councillor Ostashik. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to add to it, I think it's like any other committee, and I like the involvement of having a subcommittee of councillors working with administration to bring that terms of reference. But ultimately, like anything else, we try to bring it closest to the target. And then it's really for all 7 of us to own together on what we want the terms of references to look like. So just kind of what we did with this, checking in, checking out, making sure we're kind of close. I know I think we discussed this at a standing committee meeting. We got some input about 2 months ago. I anticipate the same type of thing, that we're working when we give an update, we're working on terms of reference. This is what we have. Share your input, and then it may take 2 meetings. It might take 3 meetings for us to kind of narrow it down to what everyone on council, because then it becomes our document as a council, not the committee. So I just wanted to rest assured that we're going to own this together. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Ostashik.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, as has been previously said, there hasn't really been a whole bunch of discussion about the composition of the committee yet. We've been more focused on what's happening with the boardwalk and future plans and rehabilitation and maintenance. But just my own opinion looking forward, I would assume that it would be this composition and appointments would be pretty similar to the other town committees that have residents on them. Following the boards and committees policy that we have. I would foresee that there would likely be a councillor on that committee as well, so that there's a conduit from the committee back to council who can regularly report to council on what's happening. as Councillor Nelson said, the stakeholder groups are important to make sure they're on that committee. And as we've discussed as a group, the Beaver Boardwalk Committee, one of the stakeholders that's important to make sure they're included as well is the citizens at large. The citizens at large, they spend a substantial amount of time at the Beaver Boardwalk with their families, recreation. They may not belong to any of the specific formalized stakeholder groups, but they are one of the stakeholders that was suggested, and I would expect that there would likely be some citizens at large in that committee as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ostashik. I have myself and Councillor Hawes. My question to the committee or administration, it doesn't matter. How long are we looking at in terms of trying to get these terms of reference off the ground? Simply because, you know, for myself, this is something I'd like to see happen sooner rather than later. So has there been any discussion in terms of how long that process should take? Councillor Nelson. I
think ultimately the next step is getting that approved by council as a recommendation. I think seeing what we've been able to do over the last couple of months, I think this is probably something that the committee and administration can turn around relatively quickly. A lot of terms of reference are going to be similar to other committees. So yeah, I don't think it would be, I would think it would be months, not years for sure. And ultimately kind of look at our CAO or potentially Ms. Way or Mr. Von Claveren for a bit of feedback, but I think we could turn around pretty quick. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I will go next to Councillor Hawes, then Councillor Waugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate everybody's comments in regards to the committee itself. And I agree. If you're looking for some, just from a person who's not part of the committee, my thoughts were as definitely those stakeholders, and then really the stakeholder group kind of looking at their group and wondering who might best fit for being part of this committee. Because I mean, there may be more experience or maybe expertise or something. And I do also agree that, looking at having members at large from the community as well. And I appreciate the potential of it being then develop that committee based on, applications similar to the other committees would be my preference personally. And so we get, who's at the table that be most beneficial and effective and efficient in moving the Beaver Boardwalks the idea of the Beaver Boardwalk forward. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Waugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering, I noticed that if we do decide to move ahead with this, that there will be tenders prepared for the work plan. I guess, is this an opportunity to ask questions about the work plan as well and what's provided on the map? I guess I'll direct that to CAO Olson.
CAO Olson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through to Councillor Waugh. It is an opportunity for council to ask questions on the work plan. Things were kept kind of at a high level and determined through some of the engagement activities that took place at the beginning of or over the kind of last year, and landed on these sections due to budget available and our understanding of what's needed. I will look to Ms. Way or Mr. Von Claveren as well if they have anything to add. If there's anything specific, Councillor Waugh, that you're looking for, please feel free to jump in before I turn it over so that they can answer something directly.
Yeah, I do. And the one specific question I had from a resident was why section O, which is red, was not included in the original work plan, wasn't prioritized. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wall. We'll go to administration whenever you're prepared on that.
I'll defer to Ms. Way.
Thank you, CAO Olson, through to the remainder of council and the committee. This is likely more in Mr. Van Cleveren's wheelhouse, but I'll take a stab at it. As is indicated on the map, Section O is one of the closed sections, and as per a previous direction of council, the closed sections are not to be repaired at this time. That was one of the reasons that we didn't include it. And then further to the conversation around the bridge, given that that section is a bit of an abutment to the bridge, it didn't make a whole lot of sense to include it at this time, or to go back to council to have that motion addressed. Thanks.
Councillor Ostashik.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through the discussions regarding prioritization of sections, it should probably be noted that there are a lot of sections that are currently threatened and at risk of potentially being closed. So part of the discussion was prioritizing the currently open sections so that they can be rehabilitated, so they can continue to remain open. Sections that are currently closed, but we kind of wanted to make sure that the sections that are currently open can continue to remain open, so we don't lose even more of our boardwalk to citizens and visitors. So that was part of the discussion that led to the recommendations for the areas to focus on. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Ostashik. Councillor Waugh.
I want to thank Ms. Way and Councillor Ostashik for answering that. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Council, I don't have anybody in the speaker's queue. If there is no more desire to ask questions of the committee or administration, there is a recommendation, or of course it's always open to council. Councillor Haas.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd be happy to make the direction the committee recommend the Beaver Boardwalk Committee recommendations and deliverables report to be brought to the February 2nd, 2020 regular council meeting for decision. And if I may speak to it.
Please.
Again, I have to say the thoroughness of the recommendations, the hard work of the committee and administration. I think that these are all doable deliverables. And as Councillor Ostashik said, and Ms. Way, in regards to, it's about keeping the boardwalk open in those places and what's logical to fix, and then look at later on down the line, because we want people to enjoy this area, summer and winter at this point. So, and thank you for answering all those questions. I'm looking forward to the putting it forward and then later seeing those terms of reference. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Council, there is a direction on the floor. Any questions at this point or discussion on the direction? Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that the public, there's certainly, we're moving quickly with the recommendations around the work plan, and largely that's due to timelines around doing work in the fall and winter. So make sure you share any concerns you have with council between now and when it comes to regular council. And I just really look forward to the time where we pass this over to a permanent committee and really start making some progress on this area. I think we've been stalled for a long time, and I think we're starting to lay a really good foundation for a sustainable part of this community that I think we all respect and we all need. So I'm really looking forward to the next couple of years and what it brings for the boardwalk. So thanks to everybody for their work on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Nelson. Council, any further discussion on this? Being none, then I will call this to question. That committee direct the Beaver Boardwalk Committee recommendations be brought to the February 2nd, 2021 regular council meeting for decision. All those in favor, please indicate. Any opposed? Seeing none, and that is carried unanimously. Thank you to the committee. Thank you to administration for your hard work in bringing the report back to council, and I, for one, look forward to seeing this on February 2nd. That being said, we will move on to our our third action item for the evening, and that is the fiscal responsibility policy found on page 17 of the agenda, and this will be presented by Ms. Olson, our CAO. Ms. Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The draft fiscal responsibility policies before council tonight for a first look and for some discussion after direction was provided in May 2020 to bring forward broad policy that captured guidance on the management of financial resources. With the discussion that took place prior to the direction being provided to administration, administration recognizes that additional direction may be required to this draft to ensure that it reflects council's intention. The draft is intended as a starting point to build something that will achieve this based on the examples that were mentioned at the meeting in May. I'll also acknowledge that this discussion initially stemmed from year-to-date financials that were brought to council for 2019 at that May meeting, where direction to create a policy with parameters for quarterly year-to-date financial reporting was not supported on its own. There was discussion about the potential of including it in the broader policy. This wasn't included in this draft. However, through council's discussion, if there are things that that you're looking for that aren't included, if there's discussion around things that are included that in your opinion don't need to be there, we open this up to council for that discussion, bringing it forward as a true draft for some collaboration between administration and council. The research and development of the policy was based on that example that was spoken to in the May meeting from Wood Buffalo, as well as I guess a similar or additional policy from Strathcona County. Review and feedback was also provided to administration as we sought a regional municipal accountant to take a look and give us some feedback as well. Included in this policy are reserve parameters for strategic land reserve and the emerging issues reserve, which was formerly the emergency reserve, the name change just under consideration of any impact to funding we might get during an emergency. As well, a framework supported by the MGA for the provision of assessment information to council prior to the adoption of tax rate. This time, I'll turn this over to council to provide some feedback and discussion around this. Ms. Fox is also here to support any questions that council might have. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Ms. Olson. Council, I see Councillor Ostashik, he almost caught me with the mic on mute. Thank you for that. Council, it's in our hands. Are there any questions or comments? Well, if not, I'm going to lead the charge. I do have one, and it came from a citizen response, a citizen certainly with some experience in the municipal field, and I thought they raised a good point. Referencing page 5 of 6 of the fiscal responsibility policy, or page 24 of 41, section 6.7.4. And basically the feedback from the community member in particular had to do with the fact that they felt it's important to encompass, and they didn't feel that this particular piece did, what the net impact change is to the bills, to the taxpayer's tax bill from the previous year. Because of course the tax assessment piece impacts, that can fluctuate, and that's really out of the municipality's hands. That's an assessment piece done by a third party assessor, and that there's a potential there for a blindsiding of not only the citizen, but also council from a political perspective in having to deal with the follow of assessment changes. And so that was the concern that they had passed on, was they, in their opinion, that 6.7.4 didn't necessarily capture that piece entirely. And I was wondering if administration could speak to that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll look to Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Chair, through to Council. So yeah, thank you. The member of the public also shared their comments with us. This item itself was a little bit difficult to capture in that most of what I think Council's looking for is already captured in the MGA. However, due to issues that took place in the past, it was important, administration understood it was important from Council's perspective to capture a statement within a policy that ensured that the updated assessment information came to council in advance of the tax rate bylaw. That is, in fact, a practice of the finance department already following the MGA. So this statement here is really just to give assurance. And I do agree that if the reasoning for making this point within the policy isn't clear, to add more context to it is totally up to the will of council. This really is to just assure council that this information is to come forward to you prior to the tax rate bylaw being adopted. And if for some reason the information isn't received in advance of that and is found out after the tax rate bylaw is adopted, there is an ability to amend the tax rate bylaw and also amend the assessments that have been sent out. So that is all covered within the MGA. I'll leave it at that. I think that just wanting council to know that these rules are addressed in the MGA, and whatever council would like to have in the policy to give them the assurance that this is happening, we're more than welcome to hear whatever council would like.
Perfect. Thank you, administration. Just as a follow-up, the individual in question, while respecting their confidence, did administration follow up with them on that point? Perfect. Okay, thank you. So that'll be good. That'll give me a foundation for further discussion or email with them. Thank you for that. Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to admin, if no, it is part of the MGA, would it not be an added bonus or an added plus just to add or make an amendment that would, say in form of impact of tax rates and net changes, so people would know if it's their taxes are going down or their taxes are going up. So would it not be a plus?
Administration?
Thank you. I'll let Ms. Fox take that.
Thank you, Chair, and through to Council and Councillor Reese. Absolutely. I think whatever Council would like to see in here that they believe would add value to Council and our taxpayers makes sense. And I don't think it hurts to add it.
Councillor Race?
I would like to make a direction now, Mr. Chair.
If I may, Councillor Race, I do have Councillor Ostashik who is in the queue, but I will put you back in the queue following him. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too shared some of the concerns that the citizens shared with council and administration, specifically regarding what clarity section 6.7 brought to the fiscal responsibility policy. And if it's going to be included in there, and I'd have to look to administration and input from my fellow councillors regarding this, but I think it's important that there's something in there regarding that the tax rate bylaw reflects the budgeted amount and not the approved tax rate, so that the rate can be adjusted so that it reflects the amount that was budgeted, not the rate that was agreed on during budget discussions. So as I said, I'd look to administration for some feedback. I'd look to my fellow councillors for their opinions on that. But I think it's important that citizens understand that part of this fiscal responsibility policy brings clarity to the fact that if there was a budget increase of $2 million approved by council, that is what's reflected when it comes to tax time, and not necessarily the rate that was approved by council, because due to changes in assessment, that can change that dollar amount, obviously. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ostashik. Administration, it looks like you want to respond to that particular point, please. Sorry, Ms. Fox, you're muted.
Apparently I was unmuted the whole time I was writing. Sorry about that. So I think I have the wording that could go in as a point in this section, and it would simply say a tax rate is calculated by dividing the amount of revenue required by the total assessment of all property on which that tax rate is to be imposed. And that language would support the exact required calculation.
Councillor Ostashik, would you like to respond or seek any further clarification?
No, I'm good for now, Mr. Chair. I'd look to some, additional discussion and yeah, look forward to seeing some type of change to bring some additional clarity. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Councillor Ostashik. I have Councillor Race, then Councillor Watt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to direct administration to amend. I should give Wendy a chance to do this. Mr. Chair, is Wendy ready?
Ms. Anderson?
Just sharing. Is it there? Yes, okay. Jim, go ahead. Mr. Chair, I think Councillor Race can go ahead. Can everybody see the motion on the screen?
Yep.
Okay. Thanks.
Councillor Race, you're good to go.
Thank you, sir. To direct administration to amend section 6.7.4 to read tax rate, semicolon, and net changes. And if I may speak to that, sir?
Please do.
I really think that this would assist us in giving full transparency to our citizens. It would also assist us in building trust with our citizens. And I think it would go a long way. So thank you, sir.
I have now, Councillor Waugh, you were in queue. My assumption is you weren't necessarily speaking to this direction. Would you like to? Okay, I'll keep you in place and come back to you then.
Yes, please.
Councillor Ostashik, you were up next then.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I support the proposed direction in principle, but I'd just like a little bit more information on what the net changes information would entail. If somebody would be able to speak to that, I'd appreciate it.
I think at this point, administration, would you like to comment on the direction and the impact to reporting, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll look to Ms. Fox to add a little bit of clarity there. Thank you.
Ms. Fox, please.
Thank you, Chair, through to Council. Have lots of information to back up and support Council's directions, so it takes me a little bit to flip back and forth between a number of different screens, so I appreciate your patience with me. I think that the net changes would, so it's very complex. It's complex. So basically, when the assessment update comes in, what it reflects is growth, growth in our assessment values, and it also reflects inflation or deflation. So the impact of the net changes would really be to break down those differences or those impacts to you, so that Council would understand from one year to the next what portion of the assessment change was due to growth, what part of the assessment increase was due to inflation or deflation, and then overall, what the impact to the overall tax rate would be. Because as we talk about tax rate through the budget deliberation process, all of that is based on current assessment values and the current amount of operating budget required, which reverse generates a tax rate. As soon as one of those factors changes, so the budget approved by council wouldn't change, but when the assessment values go up or down, the required tax rate will change accordingly to bring us the exact amount of revenue we need. So to me, the net changes encompasses all of those factors.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to myself next as a question on the direction. The proposed direction, I just want to clarify with administration. Does it provide administration with enough clarity on what the intended direction is? Please.
Thank you, Chair, through to Council. It does for me. The problem I have is that a policy needs to transcend people. So if there is any doubt in anyone's mind what that actually means, and you want more detail or clarity within that statement, you could leave it as it is and request that we come up with some wording to support what Councillor Race is trying to achieve.
Councillor Race, would you like to speak on that?
I would, thank you. So when I look at net changes, I want me as a citizen or citizens to be able to say, so my taxes are going to be less or I'm going to be paying more. And having net changes as part of this policy, would they not be able to see that then?
Administration, would you care to respond to that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I believe to me, that is what you would see.
Yeah, good. And you know, I think I'm off.
No, you're good.
Okay, good. You know, I think that's the bottom line for everybody in town. Just tell me, am I going to be paying more or am I going to be paying less? And it doesn't have to be complicated. And the big thing is, you know, I think we do have the trust of the community, but we have to keep that transparency and you know, make it easy for people to ascertain this information. So I hope everybody supports this direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Council, is there any further discussion on the direction on the floor? Any further discussion? Seeing none, then Wendy, if you could bring that back up so I can call it to question, please. We will call this to question that committee direct administration to amend 6.7, section 6.7.4 to read tax rate and net changes. Thank you, Wendy. And we'll call that to question. All those in favor, please indicate. Any opposed? Seeing none, and that is carried unanimously. Thank you, Councillor Race. Thank you, Council. I am going to go back to my original speakers queue, which had Councillor Waugh and then now Councillor Ostashik. Councillor Waugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for administration, and it's with regards to 6.2 town annual debt and payments policy. I guess I just wanted to ask a little bit about why there's something in here that has parameters that exceeds numbers set out in the MGA. So I guess I just wanted to get a little bit of rationale on that. Thank you.
Administration, if you would, please.
Thank you, Chair, through to Council. So this is a section where different municipalities had different suggestions or items that they followed. This was a way of introducing to Council that if you wanted to set limits that set stricter parameters in the MGA, you can. However, the MGA does lay out your maximum amount. So if you want to say as a municipality, we don't actually even want to get close to our maximum, this is a way of setting stricter parameters.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Perfect. Councillor Waugh, do you have any follow-up to that?
No, I appreciate the insight, and I'm just mulling it over in my head now. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you, Councillor Waugh. Councillor Ostashik, you're up. Oh,
Sorry.
you're
Sorry. Gotcha. I don't want to derail the conversation. Mine is, it's going to go back to section, I think it was 6.7. I believe Mayor Michaels had, he'd put his hand up. So if it's related to Councillor Law's question, I would defer and like I said, I don't want to derail. So until that conversation's complete, I don't want to change the subject.
Well, thank you for that, Councillor Ostashik. I will check in with the mayor. Mr. Mayor, did you have a question pertinent to that last point?
No, mine is very different too. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Councillor Ostashik, you're free to go, and I will put the mayor in queue.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, in that event, I would like to go back to 6.7 and address the concerns that I had raised earlier regarding tax rates and dollar amounts. And I believe Ms. Fox had a recommended bullet point that could be added to address those concerns. I would need to see that in writing and make sure that that's capturing the intent, and then I'd be happy to make that direction.
Ms. Fox, please.
Thank you. If council would like, I could read it off for Wendy to type out.
Yeah, I think that would be appropriate. Thank you.
So Wendy, when you're ready, if you just share the screen, I will read it out to you. A tax rate is calculated by dividing the amount of revenue required by the total assessments of all property on which that tax rate is to be imposed. And that was my comments. And within the MGA, it tells you the tax rate in which it's to be imposed. So you can either explicitly say it here or leave it at that.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Council, just so you know, I can't see everybody's hand. I did see Councillor Race's hand. So we'll go Councillor Race, you had a question on that?
I did. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So is that the total assessment of residential and non-residential?
Admin?
Thank you, Chair, through to Council. The total that is utilized is the total residential and non-residential that the municipality requires.
Councillor Race, does that answer your question? Perfect. Mr. Mayor, I did have you in queue. I just want to make...
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I do want to make that as a direction.
Okay. Sorry, Councillor Ostashik, that's absolutely appropriate in this case.
And then I'd like to speak to it if I may.
Yeah, absolutely. Wendy, do we want to capture that, please, that Councillor Ostashik is making that direction? Perfect. Thank you. Council, if you want to give that a read for a second. Perfect. And then, yes, please, Councillor Ostashik, if you'd like to speak to that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think that captures the intent of addressing the concern that I raised earlier. I think this assures that the tax rate bylaw that's brought to council for approval ensures that the dollar amount that is that's reflected in that tax rate bylaw matches the approved dollar amount that was approved during the budget process. So I think that brings a little additional clarity for future councils as well as citizens through the budget process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ostashik. Mr. Mayor, I do want to check with you to see you're going to wait for the main list, eh? Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Councillor Nelson.
My question is around the split rate. As a layperson, the way I read that motion, it just takes the dollar amount and divides by the assessment and doesn't take into account the split rate. So if I was a business and I saw that it was just total required divided by assessment, I think that's maybe something in there needs to exist for the split rate, unless I'm misunderstanding.
Administration, would you care to speak to that, please?
Yeah, the split rate is taken into consideration as far as how you can charge per class and by non-residential and residential. This wording is taken directly out of the MGA.
Councillor Nelson, does that address your question, or do you need any follow-up?
It does. I think where split rates would also be addressed in the MGA. So that's where it's tricky if we're adding things into our policy that, you know, everything goes in order of the MGA. So it's, if we're going to take this verbiage out, then we probably need to take the split rate verbiage along with it in order to avoid confusion. Just from my perspective, it would read as a one-to-one split rate with that direction. Thank you.
I have Councillor Ostashik, then I'll go to administration. Councillor Ostashik.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand and share Councillor Nelson's concern. I'd be open to a friendly amendment to add some verbiage around in ensuring that the ratio matches the council approved split tax bylaw rate.
Thank you, Councillor Ostashik. Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Chair, through to Council. I think the only thing I would caution is that the MGA, the section on assessments is about 20, I'm just guessing here. It's about 20 pages long. It's going to be hard to capture all of the different bullet points in another policy. If there was something not explicitly stated in this policy, administration has to follow the MGA. However, I do understand that council is trying to give assurance within this policy that council and administration are following procedures laid out in the MGA. So I don't know how you get around that, but there's sections on designated industrial tax and how that can be calculated and who can assess that. There's municipal, there's a breakdown on all the classifications that you can have. It states that there's a maximum that you can charge for a split to business over residential, and that has to be laid out and set and approved by council. So there are a lot of points within that are not within this policy.
Thank you, Ms. Fox. Council, I don't have any speakers in the queue right now, and we do have a direction on the floor. Anyone else like to speak or have any questions on this? Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, I'll be voting against it only because to me it reads that administration is working towards working with a one-to-one split rate. I totally agree with the concept. If it's in the MGA, I think we either got to take it all or not take any. So I totally agree with the concept. Just with how it's laid out, I can't currently support it. But if it was brought back again at another meeting or even later this meeting with the clarity of split rate, I would absolutely support it. So thank you. And I would happily propose an amendment. I just don't know what it would look like either. So apologies for that.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Wendy, if I could have a look at the direction on the floor, please, for a moment. If council will give me a moment just to read over it, please. Okay, thank you, Wendy. Ms. Fox?
One suggestion I might have to make this work is that you just create an additional bullet point for split tax assessments. And I'm trying to I've got the MGA in front of me and I'm trying to search as we're going through, but I can't keep up with the pace of the meeting. So there might be an opportunity. And this being a committee meeting, meaning that whatever recommendations we make to make changes here, if we need to come back and add and address some changes after some further work is done, I think that's probably the best way forward. Just a suggestion.
Thank you, Administration. Councillor Nelson.
I'd like to propose an amendment that just reads, and that 6.7 reflects split tax rates. And my hope is that that gives administration the ability to go and figure out what that verbiage needs to look like and all of that. If that accomplishes that, great. If it doesn't, let me know and I can figure something else out. So thank you.
Councillor Ostashik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I support that in principle for sure. That wasn't the point that I wanted to make when I put my hand up, and I realized there is a direction before us here. My hope is that at the end of this policy is not brought back to the next regular meeting of council for approval, that it's brought back to a future standing committee meeting. So it'll give administration some time to think about what the will of council is and be able to reflect that in the proposed policy so we can discuss it again before it's brought back for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ostashik. I do just want to seek clarification. Councillor Ostashik, are you willing to accept that as a friendly amendment?
My apologies, Mr. Chair. Yes, I am. That's fine.
And so I'll just clarify with the rest of council. Is there any opposition to accepting that as a friendly amendment? Hearing none, then we will acknowledge the amendment on the floor as friendly. And council, any further discussion on the direction on the floor? Councillor Nelson.
Since it's been combined, can we just see what the whole direction looks like again?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Wendy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Wendy. Appreciate that.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, council, any further discussion on that point? No? Very well, then I will call that to question. That committee direct administration to amend to include a tax rate is calculated by dividing the amount of revenue required by the total assessment of all properties on which that tax rate is to be imposed, and that section 6.7 reflects split tax rates. Thank you, Wendy. Council, all those in favor, please indicate. Any opposed? Seeing none, and that is carried unanimously. Thank you for that. And Mr. Mayor, thank you for your patience. That does bring you to the top of the speakers list.
My pleasure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to put forward a direction that committee direct administration to include the presentation of quarterly year-to-date financial updates to the draft fiscal responsibility policy. And if I can speak to that.
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This was part of our original conversation. I know Councillor Nelson brought this up. I think it's an important part for us. I also agree. I hope this comes to a future standing committee. I left it vague enough. I'm open to any amenable changes, but where administration could bring something forward that speaks to what that process, what that looks like. So then at the next standing committee meeting, we could discuss, or tweak whatever is presented. But essentially, I think this is vital. I looked at other policies today online. anything that we could find where else this could go. And I believe, at least at the moment, it belongs in this policy. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I have myself and then Councillor Nelson up. And I'd just like to speak in support of this. And I think it's important to acknowledge that Councillor Nelson did, in fact, speak to this earlier. And Mr. Mayor, I want to appreciate the fact that you brought this forward today as well. You know, I think about major corporations. This is a common practice, is to bring these financial statements forward, to make it part of an ongoing regular reporting practice. And I think incorporating that into this policy is just sound, transparent policy. And I appreciate the thought. Thank you. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, I'll obviously speak in support of this. It was kind of the genesis of the umbrella policy coming forward. So I just appreciate this coming forward. And I think some certainty about our reporting is important. And one of the important things that was said when this originally came to council was that having a policy like this just ensures that if administration isn't able to meet that quarterly deadline, that's communicated to council. So I think that's the other part. If we're going to miss a quarterly update by a few weeks and council's looped in, I think just it really helps with transparency and accountability. And I just really appreciate the concept. Thank you, Mayor Michaels.
Thank you very much, Councillor Nelson. Council, I have no speakers on the list. Would anybody else care to speak to this? Ms. Olson.
Thank you. I just to reiterate a little bit of what Councillor Nelson was saying as well. This has always been administration's intention to bring year-to-date financials in a timely manner, and the last time it came forward as well, and I want to reiterate this as well. If council at any time feels the need for an update, a financial update, they can at any meeting bring that forward for administration to act upon. This is what our intention has been the last year or two. It's been challenging to achieve that, knowing that the language that was talked about last time around included a 6-week timeframe after the close of that quarter to bring the year-to-date forward for council to accept this information. That is what we would work towards. We appreciate council's, understanding of the challenges that we've seen in the last year and a half. So if there is any change to this, if this piece of the policy goes through, we would look to communicate with council through the action pending review or any other mechanism that makes sense at that time. So just wanted to speak and add that little bit. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ms. Olson. And I will just, I just want to clarify, Mr. Mayor, are you caring to speak right? No, you're good. Okay, perfect. Council, any further discussion on this motion? No? Seeing none, then we'll read it out and we'll call it to question, please. That committee direct administration to include the presentation of quarterly year-to-date financial updates to the draft fiscal responsibility policy. Thank you, Wendy. Council, calling that to question. All those in favor, please indicate. Any opposed? Seeing none, that is carried unanimously. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My apologies. I do have to leave this meeting. There was a request from the Government of Alberta, the Premier's office, for a quick call-in. I don't have any details. I'll inform council immediately after, but my apologies. They advised me at 5:03, so I'll just get on the call. If I'm back in time before the meeting's done, I'll rejoin, but I just wanted to say that I do have to temporarily leave, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Then the chair acknowledges the fact that the mayor is leaving due to duties relating to the provincial government and communication. So we currently still have 6 councillors present in the meeting. We still have quorum. So we're going to carry on with business as normal until the mayor returns, if he's able to. Council, any further discussion? Any further directions on the policy in question? Councillor Nelson.
I'll look to the group, whether or not it needs a direction. I'm happy to make one if it does. one of the things I think is extremely important in the purpose or the policy statement or somewhere in the introduction is the word transparent or transparency. In other policies I've looked at, that's one of the key things within financial reporting in a municipality. So if that's something we can just add, fine. If not, I can make a specific direction to include the wording of transparent within the policy statement, but I'm not sure what how council feels on that. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Waugh, would you care to speak to that or carry on with your point? Councillor Waugh, are you okay if I speak to the point that Councillor Nelson just raised?
Please do. I have something separate.
Thank you. So Councillor Nelson, speaking to your point, I fully agree with that. It's almost weird. That was one of the thoughts that was running through my head earlier in the meeting, is that I think the policy title itself, I always felt that if it reflects, especially now with the quarterly reporting, you know, fiscal responsibility and transparency policy, because then it serves as a base to build off of, you know, as a living document as we, you know, move forward in the future, looking to make sure that our community is very well aware of what's happening fiscally in the town structure. So thank you for bringing that up. But as the chair, I'm not able to make that direction at this point. Ms. Fox, I saw your hand raised. Did you want to speak to Councillor Nelson's point?
Yeah, I was just reviewing the beginning of the policy, and I think it could be worked into the policy statement as well as maybe a bullet within the purpose. If council is comfortable with that, if you want to change the title of the policy, I'd look for a direction.
Councillor Nelson or council, is there any further points on this? Yeah, Councillor Nelson.
Just as we've been making directions throughout, I'll stick to that, and then we're consistent. So, Ms. Anderson, I'd like to make a direction. Like to the committee direct administration to include the word transparent or transparency within the policy statement and or purpose of the fiscal responsibility policy, if we need that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think I need to speak to it anymore. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Thank you, Ms. Anderson. And then as soon as we switch back over to the perfect, Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not against the word transparent or transparency, but isn't everything we do transparent? Every policy we put out transparent? You know, a policy lays out how things are to be done. So why is it necessary to have that word transparent? And I don't know who I'm asking this to.
I don't have any speakers in queue. I'd like to speak to it. I think really it's about promoting a culture for myself, right? Is that if, you know, it's one thing to have a fiscal policy, but in order to promote the Transparency Act side of things, I think really what we're indicating is that we're taking actions by policy to reach out and inform the community about what's going on financially and fiscally in their town. And I think that's important for myself because again, you're promoting a culture, and I think that's just good policy. So, Council, any other speakers on this point? Any further questions or debate on the direction on the floor? Seeing none, then I will call to question. Thank you very much, Ms. Anderson. That committee direct administration to include the word transparency within the policy statement and or purpose of the fiscal responsibility policy. Thank you very much, Ms. Anderson. Council, calling that to question. All those in favor, please indicate. Opposed? And that is carried 5-1 with Councillor Race against. And we will go up to Councillor Waugh. Councillor Waugh, thank you so much for your patience.
Not at all. A question for administration. It's with regards to, it's in 6.5, the operating reserve emerging issues, specifically 6.5.3. The balance of the emerging issues reserve shall not exceed 10% of prior year's audited net municipal property tax revenue. I guess I wanted to get a better understanding of why we're setting that as the ceiling. Wouldn't that equate to about 1.3 million based on this year's taxation?
Ms. Fox?
Thank you. Through to council, it's exactly the amount that it would equate to. This again is just an example of how council can set parameters if they want a maximum that can go into a reserve, or without that we can keep contributing in there till it gains to whatever amount we want. Most of this is disclosed within the yearly budget that's approved by council. It's usually shown how much is going to different reserve funds. So it is set by council, but what happens is as council's turnover and administration turns over, the information kind of gets lost in time. So as a way for councils to kind of manage what they would like to see in reserve balances, you can set maximums and minimums. The problem that we have right now is we have a number of reserves that don't have reserve parameters around them now. My preference in the future, as disclosed within budget deliberations and previous to that, is I would like to have a reserve policy that sets parameters for all our reserves based on the long-term asset management plan and the need there. And without that being complete, there are other ways that we set parameters based on the information that we have at hand. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. This is just the ability for council to put a limit on it if they want. And one way of doing that is using that, and it's an example that's taken out of another policy.
Thank you, Ms. Fox. Councillor Nelson.
So I think Councillor Waugh might have wanted to follow up with that one.
Councillor Waugh?
Yeah, please. Yeah, just quickly, thanks for the information, Ms. Fox. I you know, to me, a $1.3 million emergency reserve seems a little excessive considering our current reserve situation, but I do appreciate that it's in there for us to discuss and reflect on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All of these reserves, I think are probably better suited to a different policy personally. I look at the rec center contribution reserve. To me, that's a temporary thing. I think this policy should stay at a high level and either capture all of the reserves or let the reserves be their own thing somewhere else. It's kind of, it doesn't feel that symmetrical to include some but not others. I share some of the concerns about the $1.3 million maximum on something that, you know, we're planning on contributing $50,000 a year. That's a 26-year reserve if we don't spend anything. So I don't. I love having the conversation about these reserves and parameters and minimums, and I think that's the type of discussion that council should be extremely engaged in. But I think it should be an overall all of our reserves conversation. Because ultimately setting a max on this reserve might take away from an infrastructure reserve that we don't understand what the repercussions are, because some of the reserves are handled through a fiscal responsibility policy. So yeah, I would much rather see these be somewhere else and have this high level fiscal responsibility policy stay a little bit more simplified. So I may make a direction later on it, or possibly even a subsequent meeting with more time to reflect. But I appreciate Councillor Waugh's concerns on that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Ms. Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to respond to some of the comments there, administration is aware that this is an umbrella policy and we fit a number of things into it. in order to address them as they're emerging items. So including the emerging issues reserve and the conversation through budget of putting some of that most money into a reserve such as that. So we wanted to do as much as we could within this reserve and understand and acknowledge that, yes, more work needs to be done on a reserve policy that comes forward and dictates that those maximums and minimums for council's consideration. If that is something that is on our radar and we're looking to, it's challenging with some capacity issues and things like that, prioritization, to bring something back timely enough that it can impact some of the decisions that were made through budget, such as that emerging or emergency reserve. So acknowledging what's been said, and yes, it's not a perfect solution. If we did move forward with something like this, administration would take a look at a work plan and a time frame to do that full deep dive into some of those other areas and to clean this up a little bit. So with that in mind, just acknowledging this is kind of an overarching policy and that there are a number of things in there that they were just a means to an end so that we could put something in place to give council some assurance that how that emerging issues reserve would be spent, and then the rec center, a little bit of cleanup, I suppose. As related to the it shall not exceed 10%, that was a starting point for council's consideration as well. Putting a cap on something like that is something that council can consider. So 10%, it could be 5%, whatever council is comfortable with. And again, through the cleanup of the reserves and a reserve policy, that can be brought back too. So it's up to council, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Olson. And I just want to confirm, Councillor Ostashik, I'm not sure if I saw your hand. Could it? No? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Councillor Nelson, did you need any follow-up with that particular point?
No, I don't think I need any follow-up. Again, I'd probably have more questions if the intent of council seemed to be bringing it to a regular. I think a lot can be achieved through the budget process, and that's where a lot of our certainty comes from. So, a lot of the conversation helps kind of focus some thoughts for future meetings. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Council, I have no one else on the speakers list. Councillor Nelson?
Looking at the purpose statement, it seems as though the words sustainability are now stability. And I'm just curious why we're talking in terms of stability rather than sustainability, and if there's anything material there in how administration would carry out this policy.
Edmund?
Thank you, Chair, through to council. Just a word choice. It's not used to be sustainable in here when they're talking about financial stability. They're just interchanging the words.
That's perfect. I appreciate it. I just want to make sure there wasn't an actual meeting with the verbiage that said we're going to keep things really, really tight and not move much, instead of, there might be some major changes that have to happen to get to sustainability, especially when it comes to reserves. So if there's nothing material there, I'm fine with that. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Council, I have no one else on the speakers list. Councillor Nelson?
This is looking back at 6.2.1, which is the debt and payments policy. And if administration's not able to answer this hypothetical question, we can look at it at a different time. But if council was to make a decision to build a major project, whether that may be water treatment or rec center, and we would need to borrow $40 million to do that, or $30 million to do that, would this policy prevent us from taking that out? Because our payments each year could, I think, only be $2.6 million to service that debt.
Ms. Fox?
Absolutely. I got a comment. The way that a couple of you councillors calculate my numbers is so accurate. I wish you were here to help me, because there are lots of times I could use the help. You're bang on. That is the number. I don't think it's high enough. I would actually recommend that it say total annual debenture payments do not exceed the amount calculated and reported within the current audited financial statements for the municipality and as defined within the MGA. That gives you your maximum. If you want to set a more restrictive limit, you can do so. However, knowing the previous decisions made for the town, we're in an extremely good debt position, and we stay at that lower range, and you then have the ability to make those decisions. When a report would come forward that said we want a water treatment plant and we would need this much debt, it would take up this, we would have to report to you at that time where we are in our debt capacity, and you could make those same decisions at that time. I've actually changed the wording in mine because the 2 million is lower than the amount of debt payment we already pay. But it was definitely important for us to have that conversation so that council could understand the ability that you have within the policy.
Yeah, if I can follow up, I appreciate that. I'm happy the numbers were close at least. This is one of those where I don't know that I am looking for the redundancy that, or something different than what the MGA already legislates. I've also really enjoyed some of the new data that exists around debt limits and debt per capita and a lot of those infographics that we now have access to. And I like speaking one language more than two languages, especially when it comes to municipal governance. So to me, if we're likely going to fall in a pretty close range to the MGA anyways, if we were to take on a significant project, I think 6.2 might just be something we don't need and could just add confusion, especially for citizens trying to understand what the town's debt is like. So at this point, it might be a direction I make next meeting, or if council's looking to get rid of it now, that's fine, but might need some marination. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Waugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask administration back to 6.5. So 6.55, and it centers around how expenditures can come out of the emerging issues reserve. And I guess I noticed in a bunch of the other reserves in this piece of policy, there is the option to spend through approval of the budget. But I'm wondering in this case, if that's really necessary. If it's an emerging issue, isn't that something that should come back to council for discussion?
Ms. Fox?
Thank you, Chair, through to council. So it's really important that we support a practice that includes planned spending within the budget. However, understanding that emerging issues can come up through the year, that's why the two bullets are there. One is to support decisions. We know something's happening in 2022. It is an emerging issue. We believe as council that it's defined as that, and we can support that through the budget. So it gets acknowledged as that, and you can see that new report that's created that shows all the capital and the funding allocation. So you would see that amount there and approve it at that time. And then also there are emerging issues that might come up through the year that require spending. It's important in those decisions to know that if you don't reallocate those funds from somewhere else, it becomes a budget amendment. So this gives council, by way of motion, the ability to take funds from someplace else and place it there, or make a budget amendment by way of motion to spend out of that reserve.
Thank you, Ms. Fox.
Yeah, and I completely agree with bullet point A. I believe, as we saw this year with COVID, there needs to be the ability by a motion of council to utilize those funds in an emergency. I guess I'm just not entirely sold on spending that money within a budget process. If it isn't really an emerging issue if we have the chance to budget for it and plan for it. So I can understand why administration would want that flexibility, but to me, if we have enough time to budget for it, it's almost something that should be part of the larger discussion with council with regards to taxation versus expenditures. Anyways, I don't plan on making any direction or anything tonight or any recommendations. I wanted to have the discussion and see administration's viewpoint. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. And council, Ms. Fox?
Thank you. That just got me thinking through to council that the decisions that we made around the COVID pandemic funds were decisions we knew in 2020 that affected 2021. So placing money into that reserve at that point and including it in our budget deliberation process saves administration a lot of time in 2021 not to have to do a budget amendment. As we knew, the pandemic was continuing from 2020 into 2021, and we didn't know exactly what that might entail, but that there was emerging issues coming up that really did allow administration to use that decision-making process effectively and try and ensure that time spent trying to do a budget amendment in 2021 would be alleviated by that, and still give council the understanding and flexibility that you're in control of the decision making. Money won't come out of that fund until you approve it. So just wanted to give that example because it is a way, and I completely see your point, and obviously the decision is up to you guys, but just to give you a real life example of how that pre-planning impacted our ability in 2021 to act more effectively and efficiently.
Councillor Waugh, does that?
No, I thank Ms. Fox for the additional insight. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While we're on the emerging issues reserve, I've struggled a little bit with the emergency reserve, and an emerging issues reserve actually gives me more pause and a little bit more concern. And looking at how policies need to transcend people, unplanned events is not defined anywhere within this policy, and how that could be stretched into a lot of different things concerns me. We could have the next council campaigning on bringing back Derby days and pulling 200 grand out of the EIR for an unplanned event, which is the new Derby days. So I just want to make sure it's crystal clear that it's the unplanned events are like COVID events, not, it's Christmas in July because Christmas 2020 sucked.
Ms. Olson?
Just offering that a modifier could be placed in between unplanned and events that might give that assurance. So I don't have that word at the tip of my brain, but if anybody else does, just a thought.
Yeah, if I had it, I'd make a direction, but I just think clarity there would be valuable for others looking at ways of potentially putting on a special event in the community, because there's an emerging issues fund there. So thank you.
Councillor Ostashik.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to speak to that in particular, I share those concerns too, with the wording changing to emerging issues reserve. That's exactly what I thought too. And though Councillor Nelson has declined to give a direction, I really would like to see some kind of a direction, even if it's just a direct administration to bring some clarity around council's will, or I don't know what the wording is either, but I'd like to see that if that's what council supports, that that it's supported by a direction so we can see it come back with the clarity that we're looking for. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ostashik. Councillor Nelson.
I'll give a direction to go here. Thanks for the encouragement, Councillor Ostashik. That committee direct administration to bring back verbiage to clarify and strengthen emerging issues specific to unplanned events and significant price changes. And if I could speak to it, I had a little bit of concern with the significant price changes because it's not defined as what a significant price change is. It also gives me concern, like is a 10% increase in fuel costs something that allows us to tap into this reserve, or is that something that's incremental enough? So I would like some sort of certainty around what a significant price change is intended to be. So hopefully people support this and administration can work on making it read right and sound good. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Council, any discussion on the direction on the floor? Seeing none, then we will call this to question. That committee direct administration to bring back verbiage to clarify and strengthen emerging issues specific to unplanned events and significant price changes. Thank you very much. Councillor Race?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Should we specify a date when we would like this to come back to us in that motion?
Well, I think Councillor Nelson, go ahead.
Yeah, if I could, this is just an amendment to it. So I think at some point there would be another direction to bring this back to standing irregular by X date. So I think that would come after we've kind of wordsmithed it. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Race. Council, we're going to, as mentioned before, we'll call this to question. All those in favor, please indicate. And any opposed? Seeing none. Oh, that is carried unanimously. Thank you, Council. Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to preface my motion or my direction by saying it's not the intent of this motion to curtail conversation. In fact, I want this conversation to continue, but I want council to be comfortable that much the same as the previous direction, if they're not comfortable with some wording, to be able to put forth a direction that says, can we do something to address the wording to capture our intent and have it come back to us? So for that reason, I would like to direct administration to bring an amended fiscal responsibility policy FN 1301 to a future standing committee meeting of council. And I would like to attach a date, but I'd look to administration for an appropriate one.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ostashik. Administration, would you care to comment on the date for us, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So looking at the amendments and actually how clear, the clear direction that we've received already, we would definitely be looking at bringing something back before the end of Q1, but likely depending on the what's on the agendas and the timing and where it works best before that.
Councillor Ostashik, is that meet with your approval?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, as long as we can see it before it's called to question.
Perfect. Ms. Fox, sorry, I saw your hand just as it was going up. Ms. Fox, please go ahead.
Thank you. I was just thinking about the conversation that happened earlier around including the reserves and the reserve parameters here or not. That will make a significant difference to what we bring forward. I just want to clarify, because there was no formal direction to remove reserves, the next version would come forward with reserves still left in it.
That certainly would be the chair's understanding at this point, is that there was no direction to that end yet, or at all, potentially, understanding the will of council.
Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes, please, by all means.
At this point, then, I would just like to leave it open-ended with no date attached. Trusting that administration would bring it back in an appropriate time. And perhaps later in the meeting, there could be another motion made with a date attached to it. So for the time being, I'll leave it as is and hope that that encourages councillors that have concerns with some of the wording in here to request some direction to have it addressed and clarified with the knowledge and comfort that it's coming back to another standing committee meeting to review again before it comes for decision. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Ostashik. Council, is there any discussion on the direction on the floor? Any discussion? So we seeing none, although it's a little difficult right now. I'm scrolling through faces. I don't see any. We will call this to question. That committee direct administration to bring an amended fiscal responsibility policy FN 1301 to a future standing committee meeting of council. Council, all those in favor, please indicate. And any opposed? Seeing none. And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Council. Councillor Ostashik, thank you very much. Council, Councillor Nelson?
I actually think this is the last question I have for this right now. One of the concerns I had is that it's must be reviewed every 4 years to align with the election cycle. I completely agree with that concept. Every 4 years is about the right time frame. But my concern is if we approve it, in June or May, that each council would be reviewing this right at the end of their term. To me, this is something that should probably be in maybe not before 6 months, but not after 1 year of a council's term. So if council has a similar mindset, if there's a way to say, the first review will happen on this date and every 4 years thereafter, I think it's important for each council to be able to have an impact on policies. And if it's not going to come back until the very end of the term, I think it loses some of its import. So I look to council for their thoughts on that. Thank you.
Council, any discussion on that point? Councillor Waugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would agree with Councillor Nelson. This is something that I think should come forward near the beginning of the term. If for no other reason, it would help orient new councillors on this pretty important policy. But I wouldn't do it within the first 3 months. I would wait until the new year after they're elected. So yeah, sometime within that first quarter, maybe. So, thank you.
Council, any further thoughts on that? Seeing none. Councillor Nelson, do you have a direction you'd like to propose?
It's coming back to a standing. I'll play with some verbiage and maybe talk to a couple other people too that, may be into policies and trying to figure out where policies time up within a new council, I think is important. I think it would really help understand what those policies are. Because there are a lot of policies that, we're seeing now for the first time, and some of them are because they've been dormant for a long time. But anytime you come fresh off an election and all that public feedback, to be able to, impact a policy with kind of what the campaign was full of, I think is important. So I'll look to the next standing committee to bring this forward in a more formal way. Thank you.
Yeah, now, I'll just comment before we move forward too on my thoughts on it. In thinking about the timeline, I certainly agree. I think having a council look at this within their first year is very important. Although there's a number of points within the policy that deal with taxation, transparency to the taxpayer, reporting that net impact. That's very likely going to be felt, from June on, in a given year. So I think maybe this might actually be something that's best reviewed in that first year of a council, but more towards quarter 3 or 4, just so that they can get a feel of what those impacts actually play out like within that first year. So again, I'm certainly not opposed either way. It just might be more effective to wait towards the end of the year. But again, that same line of thinking. Councillor Race?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I really like what Councillor Nelson is saying. You know, with a new council coming in, they've got AUMA, they've got strategic planning, they have the budget, they have so much on their plate. But when I read this policy, it refers to the budget a lot. So, you know, if they saw this within the first 6 months, that would be awesome. This is new to us. And but I do agree with what Councillor Nelson is saying, and I'm glad he brought it up. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Council, is there any desire for any further discussion or direction at this point? The direction is on the has been supported by Councillor Ostashik. This will be coming back to a future standing committee meeting. But if there is any desire for further discussion and or direction at this point, now's the time. Very well. Seeing none, then we will move forward on the agenda, which brings us to our discussion item, our only discussion item of the evening, temporary accommodations discussion, and that will be led off by our CAO, Ms. Olson. Ms. Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in response to the delegation tonight, as well as some ongoing discussion with the Hinton and Region Economic Development Coalition, with the Chamber of Commerce, and then through the Agenda Prep Committee, there was support to add for the addition of short-term rentals as a discussion item tonight. Attached to support the discussion is the information report that was presented to Council in late 2019, where at that time no additional direction was provided to administration. And this is really included as a jumping off point for discussion tonight. Administration hasn't done any additional research or prepared any additional recommendations for this, as we're not sure of Council's intent. So typically with discussion items, not a lot of pre-work is done by administration, as we're seeking some direction and on this item from Council. So that's really what we're seeking tonight, to understand where Council's interest is regarding next steps. If there's any appetite for additional research or preparation of supporting documents for municipal restrictions or requirements. So with that, I'll turn it over to Council for discussion. Just also want to highlight that the folks that did the heavy lifting on this information report are no longer here, and so do our best to answer any questions, but really what we're looking for is to take some of those questions away, do that research, figure out what next steps might be, and then follow Council's direction from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Olson. I have myself in queue, and then of course we're open. Without trying to get too deep into this, because really I think that's a discussion for a future time if it's the will of Council. This is an area that I'd like to see Council explore in terms of bringing back a draft policy on. Myself and the mayor, we were, spitballing some ideas together the other day, and I think there's some potential for some real easy wins. He had mentioned in the earlier part of our delegations, perhaps a medallion system where we limit the number of authorized business licenses that are given out to certain accommodations and rentals, putting in policy into place where, we require that anybody engaging in that sort of activity be doing so in the home that they occupy as their primary residence. I will say, though, the only part of the presentation this afternoon that I didn't agree with, given the information I have right now, and I'm certainly open to reconsideration, is the notion of limiting the number of days that, somebody who's properly licensed to engage in a business is able to do that business. That would be, for myself, a bit of an overreach. There's no other business that I know of in town, where we limit the number of days of the year that a small business or, a private business is doing what they do out of their own home. Again, that's more so for a future time. there were other discussions we talked about as well in terms of having any potential accommodations being assessed on the split, the commercial rate as opposed to a residential rate. Again, lots to think about. And the good news is the mayor seems to be connecting as we're speaking. I would just like to see this come back to council for further discussion and some policy work at a future standing committee so that we could give some of our feedback by direction to administration to craft some policy around. I think ultimately that's what we're looking for. And then my feeling is that's not something we can or should achieve tonight out of a discussion item, but that's something I'd like to see us come back to. I have Councillor Haas up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would agree. I would definitely be in favor of bringing back to a standing, a future discussion on direction. I think, the group tonight, was brought to, I think, previously back in October 2019 when we first saw this report on short-term rentals and things. There was a concern. Now, with the group that came back or came this evening, showed even greater concern, even things that I don't believe were even brought up during that report in regards to some of the illegal activities that could possibly potentially be happening within our neighborhoods as well, and the safety factor there. I think it's all about accountability, and I have no problem with people having businesses. It's, but it's being accountable for those businesses and to the local residents as well. And the safety of theirs as well. So I would love to see this come back as well to a standing committee with potential looking at what moving forward of policy, taking into account, I know that previous conversation we talked about enforcement and we talked about some of the limitations that we may have due to the personnel, but I think all over, comable if, directed and proposed correctly. So thank you. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Councillor Haas. Councillor Ostashik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, I too would like to see this come back to the standing committee for some further discussion. I have heard though mentioned a couple times policy, and what I would like to see this potentially move toward is bylaw, not policy. It needs to be something that where there's rules and guidelines that have to be stuck to with repercussions if you don't. In discussing this several times, my primary concern has always been the safety of the people that are taking advantage of these short-term rental accommodations from a health and personal welfare perspective. Right now, there's no assurance that any of these facilities meet building code, safety code, or anything like that. And without getting too deep into it, one of the concerns that was raised before when this came up was the ability for administration to have the resources to be able to do inspections and police this. But I think that can be worked around, especially with the addition of our outsourced development permit inspections, and that this could perhaps be something that would fall under that realm, where the application fees for the development permits would cover the cost of the development permits or of the inspections, and that those inspections are carried out by the contracted bodies. So there's no additional demand on any of our current services, any of our current staff. There's also software available that scours these online advertisements and can pick up ones, compares to a list of approved ones, automatically generates lists of ones that aren't approved, compares existing listings to previous listings. So it can generate data on what's new, what's been rented, which I asked earlier in the meeting. We'd have our very own data on what's being taken advantage of in Hinton. And I think through some creative methods, we could probably come up with a pretty limited, impactful way of going about this, and ensuring that visitors to our community are safe when they're staying in these short-term rental accommodations. and that it's not affecting the health, welfare, and enjoyment of anybody else in the neighborhood. The one other thing I did want to address, though, is my concern that if we're going to treat these short-term rental accommodations like businesses, that they're allowed to freely operate as businesses. So the limitation of 30 days in a year as a rental, it certainly bears some further discussion. But at this point, I think if they're going to be operating as a business, that they should be able to operate as a business as unfettered as they can be. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Stashik. I have myself and then Councillor Hawes. Very, very quickly, I agree with you, Councillor Ostashik, and I should sort of clarify. When I had said policy, you're right. I absolutely do mean bylaw. That is the more appropriate approach to ensuring that this is enforced properly. Councillor Hawes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I too, I have poor choice of words. Bylaws, what I would see achieved with this. Just to share some thoughts on that 30-day and putting some perspective into it. Yeah, I mean, the 30 days a year, I mean, if these are legitimate businesses that are running, you know, I don't see enforcing something like that for sure. You know, it's, I mean, they pay their dues like everybody else and everything that's needed. And I thank you, Councillor Stashik, for bringing up that enforcement part as well, that we do have other means that weren't available to us in 2019 when we first talked about this as well. So, but yeah, I too would like to see further discussion, and we're developing a bylaw from administration on this one. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really want to see the town of Hinton take a lead on this. I think we have the advantage of having a really engaged short-term rental community. We have more than most communities our size. And I think it's important that we find a way to make sure that community is embraced as part of the offerings that the town of Hinton has. I think competition for hotels and short-term rentals is good for everybody as long as it's a level playing field. The safety is the same, the business, like it has to be the same. And one of the things I really look forward to is, even if it's just through business licenses, us having actual data can really help us build and develop policy. Like, I think there's maybe a limit of 0.05% of residents can be deemed short, whatever it is. There could be so many really interesting things that can find that sweet spot where it's adding and it's helping Hinton, and it's not inflating house prices, and it's not, you know, putting hotels out of business. There's a really good spot to be found that's a win-win for everybody, while ensuring that the people that come and visit our community have an experience that they come back again. So same thing, if the next meeting is a standing committee meeting where we set the foundations for a short-term rental bylaw, awesome. I think it'd be a lot of fun. And I think having these conversations before administration goes to work on a bylaw would make the process a little bit more efficient and create less yo-yos, and that means yo-yos of things back and forth from administration to council. Yeah, I think it's the right approach. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question to admin. Could we not have a policy, or could we have a policy on short-term rentals and then a bylaw to give us enforcement legs? So that's just a question. I don't know.
DAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through to Councillor Race. This is something I'd have to take a look at, knowing that there aren't very many best practices out there, with only 3 communities that have something in place. It's definitely something we can look at and bring back as a recommendation based on what we're seeing.
Councillor Race.
Okay, thank you. I'm good.
Perfect. Councillor Ostashik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did have a question for administration, if they're able to answer. I noticed in the previous report from October of 2019 and in the presentation that we got today, when it was addressing other communities that have bylaws and controls over short-term rental accommodations, neither Jasper nor Banff were addressed by either of those parties. understanding that they're in a national park, some of the governing legislation is going to be a little bit different than it would be in the province proper. But I'm just wondering why those two communities weren't referenced when short-term rental accommodation controls were brought up, simply because they're likely the two communities in Alberta that are most in demand for that type of service. So I would think that would probably be potentially the gold standard for how to govern that type of activity.
Administration?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Councillor Stashik, I'm not sure that I have an answer to your question, but I did reflect on the same thing and wondered if it came down to word choice, even approved accommodations and the parameters around that within the national park. It could be that maybe a different keyword search and a different review using different terminology will produce different results. So I did notice the same thing, and though I'm not sure why it wasn't included in our information report, it is something that we can look at in anything we bring forward. I'm sure there's a lot of helpful information in what they do. So absolutely agree.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ostashik. Council, any further discussion on that? Councillor Nelson.
Since there's no direction, I'd direct administration to schedule a short-term rental bylaw workshop at a standing committee of council prior to the end of Q2. And if I could speak to it, the wording's a little bit weird. Like I think we all know what we're thinking it would be, which is kind of having the conversation to build the foundation. But I also don't think it's a separate workshop meeting where we, so within a standing committee, however that wording needs to be to kind of convey what we're trying to accomplish, I'm highly amenable. I just want to make sure there's a direction on the floor so it doesn't just disappear on us. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Councillor Nelson. The chair will just seek clarification from administration that direction meets the intent that Councillor Nelson laid out.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I do have some questions around workshop, just for clarification, bringing, I guess, information, best practices, things for council to react to and help form the basis for a motion going forward. That's my understanding of what that would look like. So, similar to, the waste one that we held earlier in the year, there's a bit of research, a bit of preparation that goes into this in order to support this and give council a starting point to look at something moving forward. So as long as that's the correct understanding of workshop, that's what we would be seeking to prepare for.
Councillor Nelson?
Yeah, I'd be open to what the rest of council thinks, but that's kind of the concept, is that we all come to do work and figure out enough to give administration something to come back with a formal report. But whatever council wants, I'm good with. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Ostashik.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm fully in support of this proposed direction. I think it's substantially different than what we asked administration for before. Previously, it was just a report on what some other communities are doing. I think this one's substantially different in the sense that the intent of council is made clear that this is to move towards a potential bylaw that will at some point be decided on. So to me, the next steps after this would be report on potential bylaw or even a draft bylaw being brought to a standing committee meeting for further discussion. So yeah, I think this is something that needs to be addressed. I think I've spoken to it before. I think Hinton's in a unique situation, being adjacent to Jasper Park, similar to Canmore, that the demands that short-term rental accommodation facilities place on our community are significantly higher than a lot of other communities in Alberta. And I think we definitely do need to take some steps to make sure it's addressed appropriately. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. I have myself up next, and then Councillor Race. I'm very supportive of the direction on the table. One of the things I did back in December when there was a transition between some of the boards and moving off of the golf board was I had reached out to the Chamber of Commerce because I saw an opportunity to do some grassroots engagement with that gap in between boards, and I reached out to both Miss Shepherd and Miss Charlton. Miss Charlton got back to me, and we had a lengthy discussion about the importance of bringing up the short-term rentals accommodation piece. And then, of course, it was on our agenda moving forward with their delegation. And now we're looking at sending it potentially, if it's the will of council, to a workshop, which I'm fully supportive of. I think it's important to do. In hearing from the Chamber of Commerce through Ms. Charlton, it was identified that this is a major issue. And so we're trying to be responsive. We're trying to understand what the concerns of the business community are. But doing so a little proactively before we have these issues of these communities where you've had large numbers of houses which have been bought up by outside investors, which are creating problem areas in neighborhoods that you ultimately don't want to deal with on the hind end of things. So I think it's something we should do if we're going to get ahead of a problem as opposed to trying to deal with it afterwards. Thank you. Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I need Councillor Nelson or someone to elaborate on what does a workshop entail? Is that us drafting a bylaw, or what does it entail? And will we be having a policy plus a bylaw? So I don't know what workshop actually means. Thank you.
No. Councillor Nelson, and I think that was directed at you. So if you'd like to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the goal is to make sure that administration has the flexibility to convene an agenda item that allows a lot of collaboration, potentially some consensus-based, but versus a really formal giving direction on each line by line. And to me, if it's asking administration to bring back a report on a bylaw, I think we're already kind of there. And if it's to bring back a bylaw itself, I don't think we're there yet. So again, the verbiage is less important, but the concept is that it's an opportunity to get together and help build that foundation and make sure whatever bylaw administration brings forward reflects the feelings of council. And if I can look at an example from the past, if we would have had a 45-minute workshop-y sort of agenda item prior to the animal bylaw coming back to us, I think the animal bylaw would have been a 2-meeting thing instead of a 8-month thing. So it's really just making sure that administration has the foundation from council to build a really solid bylaw that's close to what we're looking for. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Race, you're good with that?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for having me back. My only concern is the date. Do we want to potentially see this in the middle of June? That's my only question. I think there's a sense of urgency to some extent before the summertime. I really would want to see this in no later than the end of April. That's my only concern. So I'll support this regardless. But if there's an appetite to tighten up the date, I think we need to address a workshop in April, then potentially set up a draft bylaw to come to us prior to October, right? Or at least have the discussion on how this transitions to a new council. So that's my only sort of question or concern. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to go to Councillor Ostashik, then myself.
Yeah, just really quickly. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, if there's any way that we could get it brought back sooner than the end of the first half, I would absolutely support that. Sooner that we can get this in front of us and get working on it, the sooner that we can get something in place. So yeah, for sure. Thank you. Thank you for that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ostashik. Mr. Mayor, I think for myself, I would appreciate seeing this before the end of February, to be honest. If we're talking about, a workshop where we're going to really do some brainstorming and try to capture what the high level feel of council is, I think that's something that's completely achievable within February. Mr. Mayor, you're up next.
I'll defer if it's okay to CEO Olson had her hand up. I don't know.
Perfect. Thank you. CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do appreciate the flexibility for administration to figure out where this fits over the next couple of months. If council will recall, there's probably a dozen reports that are due to come back before you prior to the end of Q1 that require some work and some consideration on administration's part in order to achieve that time frame. So we're still working within that. Also looking into April, or sorry, yes, I guess it was into April. Administration wouldn't be looking to delay this past what's reasonable. Having a bit of flexibility in the spring to bring this forward after some of those items are cleaned up. I'm hearing from council that this is a priority. So with some new resources onboarding over the next week, if that's okay to leave it as, at the outside, the end of May, that would give administration time to kind of figure out when this would be coming forward, to work with the agenda prep committee to determine at which meeting this would best fit, knowing that we'll need probably an hour or two of council's time. I was comfortable with the motion, knowing that earlier is likely better, as with most things. Just to caution, it wouldn't come before council likely before March.
Council, any discussion? Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On that note, I'm trying to combine it. I think it's important for us to give direction if there's a sense of urgency and there are certain things that aren't quite as important. I would like to at least give a different target date, to give assurances to those who brought this forward. So I don't know if it's before the end of April or the latest I would want to commit to publicly in communicating that with those who are affected by this is May 11th. It would be the last day. So I hate leaving things to discretion. Things pop up, we forget about stuff. It's common, and we do have a lot on our plate. So I think getting that assurances, I'll ask Councillor Nelson if he's amenable to having this before the end of April, and I'd like for that to be on the floor. Thank you.
Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm amenable to that. The intent was to give some flexibility and allow the chair and deputy mayor to push it if it's a priority. But if the mayor is looking for a little bit more certainty before the end of April, is totally fine with me. So thank you.
So if I may, Mr. Chair,
please.
I think hearing the CAO say it wouldn't come before March, giving the end of April, I think is a good fit together. And obviously, if something comes up and there are other priorities, we can have that discussion with our CAO and then justify to those who are affected by this why an extension is needed past the end of April. But I feel more comfortable with this. So thank you, Councillor Nelson, for that.
Councillor Nelson.
Sorry, I just had a question. Like, I don't want an extension. I want to have a date on this that is firm and it's going to come. So I don't want to say by the end of April and then say, oh, okay, well now it'll be end of May. Like, if it's end of April, then it's end of April, or let's make the motion so it says end of May. So if we're confident it can be end of April, I would love that. The sooner the better. But if we're not confident, let's make the motion reflect what we can actually deliver. So I'll look to the mayor and CAO to let me know what that date is. I'm good with whatever, but I want to deliver by that date. So thank you.
If it's all right, Mr. Chair, to provide a brief response. I agree with that sentiment that we should be choosing dates that are realistic and reasonable in order to get that done. I would have to, it's difficult to make that call on the fly. I'm hearing that this is a priority. So if anything, something else would have to move off in order to bring this. And if that is something that we have to do in order to meet that timeline, then that would be the discussion that comes to council. Just in how we are prioritizing work and where this is going to land. Sometimes it's difficult to make a very concrete determination of what's reasonable with admin's workload on the fly in a meeting. So I appreciate the flexibility, but by no later than May would work. I'm sensing the intention of council. So like I said, if there's something else that is of lower priority that we bring back for discussion to move out, we could do that during the next agenda, or sorry, the next action tracking conversation. But at this point, I don't know what that is, and I don't know if that's even something that will happen. So appreciate the conversation and the consideration of our capacity and timeframes. I don't know if that helped, but we'll follow the direction of council as best we can.
Thank you, CAO. I have myself up next. Normally, I really do try to be considerate of the requests of administration in terms of timelines and workload capacity. In this instance, though, trying to consider the scope of the fact that this is, it has been very specifically labeled as a workshop, and perhaps this is my perception. To me, this is going to entail a lot of front end, more so by council, in terms of outlining, what their goals and expectations are, and less so by administration in terms of doing a ton of research into existing policy. And certainly, it's not my expectation that administration would be attending this sort of workshop with a pre-developed bylaw in hand. And to that end, that's why I think that this is something, because it's been brought to us, in conjunction with a major industry in town. We're talking about 23 major businesses that are employers in town and the Chamber of Commerce. That this is something that we can and should be able to get done, certainly by April. Again, for myself, I'd push this into March at most. This is something that I think council can and should execute on. And we need to move forward. So I'm not in favor of seeing this move into May. Certainly not beyond that. That is, to me, that is just trying to explain to someone on the street if they came up to me and said, "Well, I heard council, has received some real serious concerns about accommodations, short-term rentals." Yeah, that's true. Well, council made the decision that they should talk about this, as part of a workshop. Yep, that's true. Then why does council need to push it out till May in order to have that discussion? I don't have an answer for that, because if I say, well, administration needs time to prepare for that, I know the question will follow, what do they need time to prepare for? This is council discussion. Yeah, that's true. And then I'm at a bit of a point. Now, if somebody else has a response to that, I'm open to hear it. But I think having the initial discussion first in that workshop is important, at least to me. So I'm willing to hear different viewpoints there. Councillor Nelson, then the CAO. Councillor Nelson.
So I would look for a friendly amendment to read the end of April 2020, and I'll speak to it briefly. It's quicker than I had originally said. If our mayor and deputy mayor are both saying that before the end of April is appropriate, they're our agenda prep committee. So that's what I'm going to go with. So thank you.
I have our CAO, then Councillor Ostashik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Fine with it being amended to the end of April. If anything needs to move off, if we're not able to achieve something else, we'll advise council at that time. I've reiterated that I understand that this is a priority. It's difficult to make a definitive timeframe in the moment. Looking at the agendas that are coming before council over the next month or two, they are heavy agendas. They have a lot on them. They have those dozen reports that council requested. So if there's an answer that's required to people on the street, those are items that affect our capital planning and have to come back for approval before we can move forward on things that are supportive of council's strategic plan even. So with all due respect, that's the reason why. So looking at March, February and March, and the number of items that council is going to see, April, we'll do our best to meet that timeframe. Thank you.
Thank you, CAO. I have Councillor Ostashik, then myself.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I don't need to see it, just a nod of a head. Is that the end of April? Is that the date? Okay. So end of April, that's fine. I support that. But I also do want to recognize what CAO Olson was saying about the amount of work that they've got to do. And also, too, the discussion that we had earlier in this meeting about our expectations of administration and what they're bringing to that workshop. CAO Olson asked for some clarity on what was expected, and we did indicate that, you know, there's some expectations of existing bylaws and best practices, and you know, not a draft bylaw in hand, but there is some preparation work that's going to have to be done to make sure that we've got the information to have a productive discussion. I don't want to go into a workshop with no homework and no background information where we're just shooting blind, because in my opinion, that's just going to prolong the process and make it less efficient. I prefer we've got some background information that we can be prepared to have a productive workshop and be able to move forward quickly from there. So if administration's comfortable with the end of April, comfortable enough that if some stuff has to get kicked down the line by agenda prep, then so be it. I'll support that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ostashik. I have myself in queue next. And I think maybe a good middle of the road solution might be to potentially consider during those heavy times, utilizing our special meetings. We do have that time frame available to us that if we do need some extra meeting time, we certainly could call it. So again, we don't need to make a decision about that now, obviously, but that's something I would throw out there as a, you know, potentially third way solution that might help alleviate some of the strain on time. So, Council, anyone else? And sorry, I just need to confirm as the chair because I can't see the screen like we normally do when we're in chambers. Did we actually have a direction around that on the table? I think yes. Wendy, can I see it? Perfect. Yes, there it was. So again, if Council, if you can just have a read over that. I'm not calling the question yet. I would like to just make sure everybody's had a chance to speak on this. But I think we'll be calling the question. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just based on your last comments, should it say a meeting of council rather than standing committee of council in case a special meeting is required to achieve that? That's kind of to all of council, I guess.
Council, any discussion on that? Seeing some nodding of heads.
Yeah, so I'll change it to just a meeting of council. That said, I don't want this to be a single agenda item at a workshop. I don't think it's worth doing meeting fees for just one thing. But if we do call a special meeting and that's where it falls, then so be it. Or even a regular council meeting if we have a light agenda. So thank you. If everybody's friendly with that friendly amendment.
Council, are we amenable to that change? Any opposition to that? All right, seeing none. Council, is there any further discussion on the discussion or the direction on the floor? Seeing none, then we'll call it to question. Thank you, Wendy. That council direct administration to schedule a short-term rental bylaw workshop at a meeting of council prior to April 30th, 2021. All those in favor, please indicate. All those opposed? Seeing none, and that was carried unanimously. Thank you for that. Council, any last minute points on that before we move on? Very well, not seeing any. We will move into the information items section of the agenda, please. And from pages 31 to 33, we have an information report on residential bins and lights rehab from the ATE reserve. And that will be presented by Ms. Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. During budget deliberations, Council requested a brief report for information items to be brought forward. Last week, we covered the server replacement, and this week's information report covers the residential bin order for 2021 and the ATE reserve use for street light rehabilitation. The residential bin number for 2021 was a typo error and should have read 1,008 bins funded from both the carry forward amount from 2020 and the addition of the 50,000 new for 2021. The street light rehab was not actually to be funded from the ATE reserve. This is an error as well. Instead, the Safety Initiatives Reserve Fund was to be accessed for the source of funds. However, through an early change to 2021's operating budget, where cost for work on a streetlight standard was covered by Alberta Transportation, this rehab may be managed through the operating budget in that area. At this point, if council has any questions, please feel free to bring them forward now. I have Mr. Woloshin to assist in answering any of your questions. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, CAO. Council, are there any questions or comments regarding the information? Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is specific to understanding we're not now utilizing it, but we did approve it as a budget item, but utilizing the ATE reserve for kind of a regular project. Looking at the policy for those funds, it was very intentionally crafted so that it isn't part of the town's general revenue, and utilizing it just to repair streetlights to me isn't a new initiative or a community-driven initiative. So I'm just curious if it does fit within that policy, or and it may need an enhancement in the policy in the future to make sure that it isn't part of just general operating revenues.
CAO Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to answer Councillor Nelson's question, the parameters around the Safety Initiatives Reserve Funding, so the ATE reserve itself cannot be accessed, but for something like this, the Safety Initiatives Reserve Fund could be used to fund safety initiatives in the municipality or anything that's driven by the community is per the definition within that policy. So these uses are through council approval as well. And in the past, it's my understanding that these lights have been funded through this reserve. And I look to Mr. Woloshin if that is incorrect. That is my understanding. So I think this came forward in that area because of past precedent that was set, and that's hopefully an answer to your question. But yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Mr. Woloshin.
Yes, thank you, Council. The answer is we, in the past, did about 60 sodium light replacements, and it came out of the safety reserve. So it's probably more of a typo error or a mistake when we were doing the budget that we requested the $20,000 to be forwarded out of the ATE. It should have been the safety reserve.
Councillor Nelson, any follow-up?
Yeah, more just a comment. I think our Safety Initiative Reserves Fund specifically says special projects only. And I think as we move forward, we should probably stick to that. I know one of the biggest things with automated traffic enforcement is that none of those revenues go into general revenues to be spent on, replacing light bulbs. Like that's a cost of doing business. So just something to be aware of in the future. I'm happy that we're not depleting that fund with that this year. And I don't know that the policy needs to change, but maybe just something we want to be watchful of in the future. So thank you. That's all I have.
Perfect. Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Council, any further questions or clarification on the information item? If not, there is a recommended action, or of course it's council's will. Councillor Nelson.
I'd like to seek consensus that council accepts this report regarding the purchase of residential bins and the funding of streetlight rehabilitation as information. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Ostashik, I did see your hand come up as well.
No question or comments. I was just going to make the motion. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Councillor Ostashik. Council, any discussion, debate, or questions on the direction on the floor? Being none, I will call that to question, please, Wendy. that council accepts this report regarding the purchase of residential bins and funding of street light rehabilitation as information. Council, all those in favor, please indicate. All those opposed? Seeing none, and that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, administration, council. We will move on to our reporting period. And we'll begin with council, and we'll start this evening with Councillor Waugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have nothing to report.
Perfect. Councillor Hawes.
To report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Ostashik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have nothing to report either. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, last week we did a bunch of quick work with the Beaver Boardwalk to get it to where it is now. I just want to thank my fellow committee members and administration for being really flexible with my schedule to randomly meet at 7:30 at night. So thank you to council administration. On Thursday, I attended BSN, which featured Doug Griffiths, and he had a special guest, Heather Thompson, who had a really interesting background and really added something. If you've heard Doug speak, he's amazing, but having a bit of a foil and someone to mock him a lot of the time was actually a really fresh look at Doug, and I really appreciated it. And thanks to CA Olson for chairing that and stepping up to make sure it still happened. And then again, we keep working on our wetland policy review group, which seems to be meeting almost every week now to try to get some recommendations back to the provincial government. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Mr. Mayor?
Nope, just Bebo and BSN, and Councillor Nelson took care of that. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. For myself, I did send out an email today, again, to our Chamber of Commerce. And one of the sections I'd covered off not only was keeping them updated about this evening's meeting, but more importantly, in my new role in participating on the policing committee meeting, I wanted to use this as an opportunity to give our businesses a chance and an ability, very specifically, to reach out to our policing services to express their concerns. We always know, we hear in the community stories about crime and its impact on local businesses, especially considering the fact that we do have some commercial areas that are, a little bit more out of sight. And so it's my hope that the chamber will reach out to some of their members and allow them a little bit of an avenue through me to sort of express those concerns to our protective services and our staff sergeant. And of course, that applies to any member of our community. I just, I'm really trying to make some inroads, in making sure that the voice of business can be heard through those boards that I'm on and representing. And then the other thing regarding policing is, and I appreciate the mayor sending out an email on this. I have registered for the 2021 AUMA President's Summit on Policing. It's a virtual event, obviously, given the state of COVID. It'll take place on 2 days, February 4th and 17th. So I'm looking forward to see what that brings out. And I believe the mayor was intending to also register for that. So hopefully we'll have some interesting feedback for council. And that takes care of my reporting, and we'll move on to the CAO reporting status. Oh, sorry, Councillor Race. Councillor Race, did I skip you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm still here.
No, if I skipped you, please accept my deepest apologies. It's the tiling on my screen.
Well, I accept your apology. I only have one thing to report. Last Sunday, I attended a very good monthly meeting of ASH, and that's all I have, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Race. And once again, I apologize. I hate Zoom. It always seems like I miss somebody in the reporting period. So we'll go over to the CAO for reporting status report and the action pending list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have one item before I move into an update to action pending, and that is that I'm not sure if council or the community's noticed, but our sprinkler water tanks have been moved into place. So you'll see them by the snow yard on Robb Road. and one on West River Road. These were donated by Helmig, and another company I don't have the name of, unfortunately, apologies, donated their time to move them for us. So thank you to all that were involved in that, and that's just a little update on something that you might see as you're driving around. I'll move into action pending. Administration spent some time with this over the last couple of weeks, taking a look at where everything was sitting. The changes that you'll see are generally related to the due date and a revised date, and generally in areas related to infrastructure services where we're getting a handle on things under Mr. Woloshin's leadership in that area. So I'll just highlight a couple of these for council's benefit and the public's benefit as to where they're sitting and why. You might see some delays and things coming back. So the first one being MD 1759. I believe that's on page 1 of 8 or 3441. And that's the water service levels report. And so this has been delayed, I think, an additional time before. We're looking to collect some more data before bringing a report back. Mr. Woloshin is now working with an external consultant to commence some more detailed analysis of those rates through that support. So that's something where the due date has changed until May 2021, just for that additional time needed. MD 1879, the Maxwell Lake Recreation Outline Plan. So part of the reason this hasn't come back is due to the fact that we didn't have the AAP approval, and some of the items within that needed that lens before it came back for council's final review and potential adoption. As well, administration in working with the BIBO committee and the recommendation of the creation of an oversight committee for this area, there was just some holding off to see if there was anything that might come through that group as a public engagement mechanism. In any case, this can be brought forward for review, and if council wishes to direct any other committee involvement before adoption or anything else that you might want to consider, the opportunity will be presented. So we're looking at, I'm not sure if we had an updated date on that or not, but those were some considerations and why a delay was seen. So looking to clean that up.
Sorry, Wilson, I did have a question from Councillor Race, if that's okay.
Mr. Chair, it's not a comment, it's an addition, something that I would like to pass on to CAO.
Okay, if we can, we'll just wait until the end of her report, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Ms. Olson?
Yeah, you bet. Just a couple more items, and then Councillor Race, I'm happy to receive your question or your comment. MD 2031, the volume-based fee structure development. This is required, again, some more in-depth data collection than we anticipated as we got going, as well as some analysis before being able to be brought forward. So the date has been changed. And at that time, we should have a better understanding about some bin size and allocation and things like that. We'll continue to update council. So at next month's action pending list review, provide an update to council as to where that's sitting. So apologies for the delay there into April 2021. MD 2032, again, this is in a similar area related to recycling options engagement. With the slower rollout of the modernized waste management system, this again will need to look to delay, and this is due to a couple of reasons. That slower rollout, more work, I guess, in that regard than was anticipated, and as well, just with the turnover in infrastructure services and with Mr. Woloshin reviewing what's being considered, and that rollout of the waste system and the time that's taking. So this was some direction provided by council to look at recycling options and to engage with the community to determine what the community's appetite is for that. Prior to bringing that information back to council to support any decisions for future budget years. So there is a little bit of engagement that's going on, some questions posed to the community. That information will be collected and it'll be used in anything that comes forward. But we're looking at May 2021. And again, updates provided to council should anything change in that regard. And then finally, and I didn't get a chance to speak to the mayor about this before including this, but MD 2106, so the meetings with our elected officials for major infrastructure projects such as the water treatment plant and rec center, we're looking to book those. I did require a bit of additional time just to follow up with West Fraser after the budget was passed in December. I've got some meetings with our with ISL this week to get that stuff in place so that we have the information that we need to move forward and start to talk to our elected officials about what's possible as far as grant funding and things like that. So apologies, I didn't update the mayor before updating on our joint action item. So otherwise, things are on track. Council will notice that the reports that are due to come forward before the end of Q1. We're on track. We're working on those to bring those in a timely fashion. Again, some of them affect budget, affect capital budget, and things like that. So I will leave it at that. And again, we'll continue to update council at the next time this list comes forward to standing for review. So with that, I'm happy to do my best to answer any questions. I've still got a few people on Zoom to assist me if there's anything specific that I'm unable to. So thank you.
Perfect. We'll start with Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is directed to our CEO. I have had so many people thank me for the pretzel. And the pretzel was administration's doing. It was a good news story, something that we need in our town. So Emily, I am so appreciative of whoever came up with that idea. Good job. And thank you so much.
Thanks, Councillor Race. Council, any questions on the action pending list? Seeing none, CAO, looks like you're good to go.
That's great. That really wraps it up for me at this point. And thank you for the discussion on the pretzel.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We'll move on to legislative services update. Anything to update, Ms. Rendell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have nothing to report.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And then Executive Assistant Logistics Information, Ms. Anderson?
I have nothing as well.
There we go. We do have a closed session labeled under discussion item, legal FOIP section 27. So council, we will adjourn for a 5-minute break. We'll give everybody a chance to refresh themselves, and then we will we'll meet back here at 7:08. Oh, Ms. Olson?
Is there a motion that's required, or we'll come reconvene and then create the motion to move in camera? Just for clarification.
Sorry, yes, absolutely. Yep, thank you very much. We are looking for a motion on that. Thank you. Council, we are looking for a motion in order to move in camera. Councillor Ostashik.
I'd like to move that council move in camera with a 5-minute break.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Councillor Ostashik. These long meetings, they just get to you, huh? All right. So, council, any discussion on that? And I appreciate you setting me straight. Council, all those in favor, please indicate. And any opposed? Seeing none, that is carried unanimously. We will meet back here now at 7:09.
Apologies, everybody. I'm having trouble accessing our bias. Oh, waiting for me to confirm what? Did you text? Oh, okay, so you'll text once it confirms. Okay, perfect. Sounds good. Thank you. Okay, bye. Apologies for the delay. Fayaz is waiting for YouTube to confirm that the live stream is kicked in. So everything's good on our end. It should just be a moment, hopefully. We're good.
Perfect. All right. We are reconvening at 7:49. And council, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Based on our in-camera conversation and the legal matters, I'd like to give a direction to direct administration to bring an in-camera information report on the legal discussion from the January 19th standing meeting to the February 2nd council meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council, is there any discussion or debate on that? Seeing none, I will we'll call that to question if we could have it pulled up on the screen. Is that possible at this point?
Apologies, Mr. Chair. I didn't
Okay,
transfer the screen.
We'll have the mayor read it out one more time, please, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Direct administration to bring an in-camera information report on the legal discussion from January 19th standing meeting to the February 2nd council meeting.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council, any discussion? If not, I'll call that to question. We'll call that to question. All those in favor, please indicate. Any opposed? Seeing none, and that is carried unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council, Councilor Nelson.
I would like to move that we adjourn.
Thank you very much. Any discussion on that, council? Seeing none, we'll call that to question. All those in favor, please indicate. And that is carried unanimously. We stand adjourned at 7:51 p.m. Thank you very much, everyone. Have